Shouldn't be said. It is not right. A woman.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very, very good morning to you. Welcome back to the show. It's 3 minutes past 10 o'clock. It's Talk at the home of common sense. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Absolute pleasure to have your company. As always, an awful lot to talk about, whether you're listening on DAB+ radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device. Always lovely to have you joining us. Another beautiful hot day, don't it? Where you had the flash flooding as we had in some parts of London yesterday. Absolute chaos. Hope you managed to escape all of that. I hope we get another nice, warm, sweltering day. And I hope we can keep you company throughout it. Coming up in the next few hours, and particularly in this hour, we're going to be talking in part about the 21-year-old man who's been arrested by counter-terrorism police over a series of arson attacks, including a fire at Prime Minister Keir Starmer's family home in North London. The man remains in police custody. We'll bring you any details on that as we get them if they develop. Plus, hundreds of migrants, up to 500, crossed the channel in small boats yesterday as Keir Starmer stood in Downing Street promising to take back control of Britain's borders. Of course, he was talking about legal migration in particular yesterday, this immigration bill. But actually, it's the illegal migration that bothers more people. And let's face it, no one trusts that the Prime Minister is going to deal with the legal stuff either. Certainly, what he had to say didn't really prove very convincing for anyone, I suppose, on the centre or the right. But on the left, they are up in arms. Left-wing Labour MP John McDonnell likened the PM's speech to Enoch Powell after Keir Starmer warned that mass immigration risks making Britain an island of strangers. Meanwhile, the Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch, has launched a review of the Tories' local election losses to Reform UK. Not quite sure what the review needs to have, other than that you guys ballsed it up for 14 years. No one trusts you at the moment, and Nigel Farage seems more genuine on the big issues that people care about. I'm not sure you need to have a review that lasts more than 3 minutes on that one, but there we are. Plus, we're going to talk about a NatWest customer who complained about an LGBT pride campaign at his local branch last July, who was told to, well, go and bank online then. Not quite sure that is the solution. We'll talk about that and plenty more besides. Delighted to say, joining me today, as regularly on a Tuesday, Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online. Very good morning to you.
Morning, Julia.
Are you coping with the heat well?
Just about, yeah.
Is it just me that boys are all generally just like, I know we're making generalisations. You generally all operate at a heat level about 5 degrees above most women, as far as I can
absolutely.
tell.
The battle over this air conditioner in here
we do have battles over the air. Yeah. Well,
fierce.
the main issue we have is that I've had a cough for 3 years, basically, and as soon as the aircon clicks on, which gets to a temperature you like, I then start coughing, as I'm sure you have noticed. But anyway, we're going to see him sweat gradually throughout the show as the air gets warmer and warmer in here. Keir Starmer appears to be sweating, though, over the immigration issue. See what I did there? That was Maidley-esque, I thought. Maidley.
That's why I pay you the big bucks. This is
pay Maidley the big bucks. Anyway, it is. I mean, you've got to see the funny side. You've got to laugh, or else you'd cry. While Keir Starmer was speaking yesterday, some 200 migrants made it over on the boats across the Channel, particularly calm weather yesterday, while he was giving his speech yesterday morning at Number 10 about tackling legal migration. We understand up to 500 came in total during the day. Of course, it's different every day depending on the weather. Again, the number of arrivals completely depends on the weather, and no policy that any government seems to instigate. His announcement to take back control of our borders, little stealing of the Vote Leave campaign slogan, talking about how UK risks becoming an island of strangers. He has managed to alienate both left and right. The right basically don't believe a word he says. We were inundated with calls and messages yesterday from audience members just simply saying, like, I just don't trust this guy. 5 minutes ago, he was calling everyone a racist or far right, if they even said, well, not 100% sure mass immigration is a good thing. And now on the left, we've got the likes of John McDonnell, Zara Sultana. Both of them, of course, are actually suspended, but they were elected as Labour MPs, accusing him of basically likening him to Enoch Powell. But another MP, Olivia Blake, no, never heard of her either, but she's still a Labour MP, called it divisive and hostile. What do you make of the fallout from this speech?
I mean, well, it was always going to pan out like this to a certain extent. I think it was clear that Keir Starmer had to appear to get tough on immigration after those local elections. But you got that perfect contrast, didn't you, between the rhetoric and the reality, where he's announcing these measures, trying to look very tough, and yet you're still seeing hundreds of people coming into the country illegally on the small boats. Yes, the speech itself and the measures are more about bringing legal migration down, but it underlined the point, didn't it? And then this response from what used to be the left of the Labour Party, now the kind of left of the Labour Party, sort of in Siberia, as it were, since they've been kicked out. I think they outdid themselves with the levels of hysteria. To suggest that any kind of comments, as mild as they were, about the fact that if you have a combination of mass immigration and not very good integration, you're going to end up with a society in which people are siloed, strangers on an island, as Starmer referred to it.
People unable to communicate.
These are clear-cut problems that people left, right, centre, in between have recognised for a very long time. To liken this to the Rivers of Blood speech is not only, it's hysterical in both senses of the word, I think.
Well,
these people's grip on reality seems to be...
Well, I mean, this is the scary thing, though. I mean, Zara Sultana is frankly one of the most ridiculous people ever. And every time she opens her mouth, I just think you're just talking absolute nonsense. I wouldn't trust her to sort of, read a bus timetable to me. I really wouldn't. But John McDonnell, let's remember, John McDonnell almost became the Chancellor of this country. He was almost in charge of the Treasury. Before Keir Starmer was leader, Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell, they came within an inch of getting into Downing Street, with the help of people like Keir Starmer, by the way. They're a terrifying thing. I mean, let's face it, the most divisive people in this country are the far left. Are the people like John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn, who have, created divides, the anti-Semitism that they have allowed to be engendered in this country, the pushing of that agenda is quite extraordinary. But it is amazing that a lot of the things that Keir Starmer said yesterday, we're discussing it obviously a lot on the show yesterday, virtually everything he said is, if that speech had been made by Nigel Farage or by Kemi Badenoch, he would have decried that as divisive, far right, evoking Enoch Powell. He would have made exactly the same criticism that the far left are making of him.
No, absolutely. I think that's one of the many hypocrisies in all of this. I mean, there's all of the U-turns that people have been pointing out, the fact that it was only 5 years ago that he was standing for Labour leader saying, quote, we must make the case for freedom of movement, not just immigration in general, not just how it's a good thing on balance, but freedom of movement. So there's clearly a lot of nonsense here. I think he will, to a certain extent, cherish the the scrap and the fight. I mean, this one thing that really defines this Labour leadership, this Labour government, in the absence of any other mission, is that it really likes to upset the left of its own party. It seems to gain a certain level of enjoyment from that. But you're absolutely right insofar as but the Labour Party has spent the best part of 5 years tone policing the Tory government about absolutely everything. Yeah. So for now to them to engage in this is quite
tee-hee, really, exactly. I mean, yeah, the policing of words and the choice of words. I mean, on one level, there are echoes of Enoch Powell, but only because very few politicians are brave enough to actually speak. And again, we're not going to get into, was Enoch Powell racist? Was he right to say this or that? There were elements of what he said in his speech that were proved correct. They were. It is a simple matter of fact in terms of divisions in this country. That was when immigration was at 20 to 30,000 net a year. We are now looking at it being 900,000, 700,000. It's likely to fall again this year. Home Office predicts it to be at over 500,000 a year all the way to the end of this decade. Now, the conversation can often get caught up in, sort of, let's face it, genuine far-right debate. Now, I'm sure you're like me. I couldn't care less what colour someone's skin is. It's utterly irrelevant. I do care if someone arrives in this country and can't speak the language and can't get a job and can't contribute. I do care if their children arrive at school and they can't speak English language. Fine if it's a second language and they speak it great. But actually, if kids who are here are being held back because teachers are having to focus on teaching those children their language skills, which is certainly the case in some of the primary schools near where I live, then that is an issue and it's something that people genuinely should be concerned about. If people who are arriving here are unable to communicate, are unable to join local communities, speak to their neighbours, that is an issue. Even just down to people, not being able to communicate with their doctor. And so, I'm saying the amount of times I've stood in my local doctor's surgery while somebody who clearly can't speak more than 3 or 4 words of English trying to communicate with the receptionist for sort of 20 minutes at a time. A lot of people just said, I'm sorry, this isn't good enough. This isn't put up with in any other country. We don't know why it should be put up with here. I think those are genuine concerns, and that's not even looking at the proper economic issues that are brought here. The key thing here is that I think we have a shift. Now, Keir Starmer can upset the left as much as he wants. I don't think it necessarily brings in any votes from the centre ground. And I would say people concerned about massive uncontrolled immigration are centre ground. They're not far right. They're not even right wing. Huge number of Labour voters, actually. Many of them are very impacted by this issue. Red wall seats and others. But in terms of actually the debate actually being had and it being now... for most people, the vast majority of people in this country, a normal part of discussion to discuss the economic, the cultural, the other impacts of mass uncontrolled immigration. And it has been mass and uncontrolled, and it still is uncontrolled to all intents and purposes. That's a good thing, isn't it?
Well, I mean, on the one hand, it's you get a sense that politicians at least have to respond to this issue now. Like, even if it's superficially, that kind of feels like progress to a certain extent. The problem with what Keir Starmer said was partly what the policies that he was offering didn't measure up to what he claims they would, and also when he just talked about this issue, no one really believes him. But if you look at the fundamentals of it, it's a pretty reasonable point that he's making, which is to say that we celebrate the people who have come here and made a contribution. There are various people from various different parts of the world who have made Britain their home, become British. We're not taking that for granted for a second. But at the same time, we have gone through a very unusual period of very high immigration, of uncontrolled immigration, of broken borders, of illegal immigration being rampant. And also in the absence of integration, you can end up with a society which isn't cohesive, which doesn't mould the parts together. That's an entirely reasonable point. I think the vast
and anyone
majority
who doesn't
of Brits,
get that hasn't been paying attention.
That is not the fire and brimstone stuff that you got from Enoch Powell. That is not him, ventriloquising his constituent about how the black man is going to have the whip hand over the white man. Absolutely. That is not about this nonsense that Powell was spreading, that not only were Commonwealth migrants unlikely to integrate, they didn't want to, even at the very low numbers that existed at that particular time. So without wanting to stick up for Keir Starmer, I think the largest part of the objection to what he said yesterday was that people don't believe him. The core of it is a pretty reasonable point. I think people of all different backgrounds across this country would share.
Absolutely. And the only thing is, of course, the prediction is, and Yvette Cooper confirmed it in the Commons yesterday, that all of these measures will lead to only a 100,000 drop in net migration to this country every year till the end of the Parliament. Well, I mean, it's not even going to come into force yet, so it's, we're going to basically have a couple of years of that. That's not going to fly for people. We know as a result of Rishi Sunak's changes in the year or so he was Prime Minister. Difficult to keep up with how many we've had recently. It all just blends into one swirl of horror, but we are going to see numbers come down, and of course post-Ukraine, post-Hong Kong immigrants and things like that. But we're still going to be looking at over 500,000 more people coming every year. Where on earth are these people living?
And it's
where are they going?
And it's significantly higher than, forget when Labour were last in power, but just before Brexit. So this is the thing, we have this rhetoric around we need to bring down immigration because people are concerned about it, etc. They're still going to be in a situation where it's significantly higher than it was.
And by the way, when the Home Office says it's going to be 525,000, they've been wrong on every single prediction so far, and they've revised even their figures when they had their figures for 2023. They revised them in 2024, and it's going to be interesting. Thursday next week, I think we get the figures, the latest figures for the whole of 24. There will be a revision on that 728,000.
And it's only going in one direction.
Yeah, but it turns out no, it was only 60 people after all. Got that wrong. Not going to happen. Well, I mean, I'd love to hear from you. Labour MPs have accused Keir Starmer of echoing Enoch Powell after the Prime Minister warned mass immigration risks making Britain an island of strangers. What's your reaction? Did he say anything wrong? Was it not accurate? Does he risk alienating people on the left? Does that really matter? Will he actually win anyone's votes on the right? I'd love to hear from you. Again, such as being concerned about immigration as a right-wing issue. Certainly ain't a far-right issue. I would have thought it's a paying attention issue. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. Let's also talk, can we, about a man, a 21-year-old man who has been arrested over suspected arson by counter-terrorism police investigating a fire at Keir Starmer's North London home. This is the home he shared with his family. We saw him banging pots and clapping outside during lockdown. A car also believed to belong to the Starmer family in the street also damaged. Another fire at another property also believed to be owned or certainly linked to the Prime Minister. Obviously, this is a massive concern. I got told off for a message I put last night. The suspects have narrowed it down to 70 million. In no way inciting any violence. We've had 2 MPs in recent years murdered. We have also seen a horrific number of attacks. Robert Jenrick's doing a media round today pointing out that it's quite the norm to get death threats and attacks and risk of attacks on not just MPs but on their families, including his own family, which is absolutely horrific and unacceptable. We don't know the identity of this man. We don't know whether he is or is not going to be charged, and what any motivation, if there was any, for doing so. But there is this ongoing issue, isn't there, of the safety of our elected members of Parliament and our democracy.
No, absolutely. It's not a new issue by any stretch of the imagination, but it's something that, particularly at a time when politicians are it's a lot easier to find out where they live, it's a lot easier to find out what they're doing, it's a lot easier to find out, as we saw with the horrendous David Amess murder, don't necessarily even have to be in the constituency to know where the constituency surgery is going to be, to show up at a certain time and so on and so forth. The accessibility, it's on the one hand a good thing because people can talk to their politicians, still remain people within the community they can engage with. But that comes with certain risks that definitely need to be mitigated against, especially in this time in which, whilst we shouldn't catastrophise about it, there is obviously around the edges a kind of upsurge in political violence in certain quarters, which we need to always tamp down upon whenever it flickers up.
I would be intrigued. I know nothing about the identity or the motive of if this was an arson attack or a series of arson attacks over a period of days. But I can bet you one thing: if it turns out that someone is motivated by right-wing ideology, that will be constantly given coverage for the next week. If it turns out they were sort of a pro-Palestinian activist or something like that, and I have no information on this whatsoever, I bet you anything that'll all be just brushed aside very quickly. I'm just saying these things get treated very differently, do they not? Let's also talk about the extraordinary revelation that more than 400 ISIS jihadis and their brides have returned to the UK and not faced any justice whatsoever. Lord Alton, who's the head of the Joint Committee on Human Rights, said ministers cannot wash their hands of crimes because they happened overseas, and his committee has issued a report saying we're looking at fighters who carried out killings, terror attacks and even genocide after joining, and again, prescribed banned terror group in Iraq and Syria. And these are British nationals. Many of them did, Shamima Begum, they burnt their passport, but, they're still British, and they've come back to this country, but they're not actually facing any sort of legal action of any sort whatsoever, which is strange when, we've got soldiers who are accused of crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan who are still facing probes into their behaviour. quite rightly, we should always make sure that crimes are not committed by any Brits abroad. But I'm terrified these people are coming back to us.
No, this has been a sort of ticking time bomb for some time, really, since ISIS were beat into a hasty retreat on the ground, that there was going to be this problem, people beginning to come back. Also, there's another ticking time bomb in northeastern Syria itself, with the number of ISIS fighters, many of them from the West, many of them from Europe, who the Kurds are basically keeping on top of, who are in Kurdish prisons at the moment. And depending on how things go in Syria, those people could end up closer to our shores once again. I mean, this is why the Shamima Begum thing blew up in the first place, was because of the fact that by dint of her having, in theory, dual citizenship, they could strip her of her citizenship.
She doesn't have. That was a completely false claim that she was.
And it was kind of theoretically
Bangladesh or Pakistan. I can't remember which, but she didn't. She simply didn't have
having access to it in theory, and therefore they wouldn't render her stateless. So that gave them a kind of loophole to do this. But that's why that business was always a little bit grubby, because it was that we need to. In this case, we can stop her from coming back because we know that our existing legal setup is not equipped to deal with returning people. All these hundreds of other cases, obviously, that doesn't apply.
Yeah,
so we're now facing
I
the
think
same
there
problem.
are a problem, and I think we should have these people back, including Begum. But however, but only if they were put behind bars.
Exactly.
I don't understand what the problem is there, but I just find
They've
it
just kicked
extraordinary.
the can down the road on this.
Yeah,
You would
I
have
made
thought
it someone else's problem.
After the Shamima Begum thing, we need to have a look at our domestic laws. We need to find a way of being able to prosecute and lock up people who, essentially went to war with our way of life. No, absolutely. And yet there's not been any attempt to think about that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people they were fighting actually against, British and other allied forces, who went in to tackle ISIS. Well, that's treason. I mean, throw them in the clink and lock them away forever. Just finally, before we go to a break, I want to talk about Donald Trump's arrived in the Middle East. He's arrived at the royal court of Saudi Arabia. This is all part of the Crown Prince's efforts to pretend he lives in and runs a normal country and isn't a murderous dictator. Let's all remember who we're dealing with here. Oh, he's modernising the country. Oh, thanks for letting women drive. What a lovely progressive man you are. He's almost as progressive as the Pope. I mean, seriously, the different judgments given to different people, it's quite extraordinary. But Donald Trump has defended a White House plan to basically accept a $400 million gift of a luxury jumbo jet from Qatar, which he says he wants to use as America's Air Force One presidential plane. However, at the end of his term in the office, it's going to be gifted to his presidential library. I'm assuming it won't just sit there. I'm assuming it will occasionally get used by the Trump family. What on earth would any US president be doing, taking a $400 million gift from Qatar, a country which sponsors terrorism, has provided safe haven to pretty much every terrorist leadership group, including Hamas in the Middle East, only able to negotiate the release of an Israeli-US hostage yesterday because they got a hotline to the Hamas leadership. I mean, this is insane, isn't it? Just for the security reasons, let alone the bribery reasons.
The man loves a freebie, what can we say? I mean, it does...
Isn't it funny how rich people love freebies?
Absolutely, that's probably how they
stay rich. He could buy his own plane.
It puts Keir Starmer and his glasses and his Taylor Swift tickets into perspective to a certain extent, doesn't it?
I like that our hopeless sort of not corrupt, but I can't
kind of
use
twee
that word.
by comparison.
Yeah, but I love that people lose their jobs here for an expensive scandal involving bath plugs.
Yeah,
I like that.
It's one of those things where I think it was the primaries 2015 or something. Donald Trump would say things like, "I know the system is corrupt because I benefit from it," and I think maybe this is another kind of example of, he's one who likes to indulge in some of the things that come his way. It looks a grubby business. Even some of the people who are really in his inner circle, people who really are sort of ride or die with the president, have come out and spoken out against this because it just is a terrible look. It's
terrible. Everything about it is a terrible, terrible idea. But there we are. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and everything else we're talking about. But in particular, these Labour MPs accusing Keir Starmer of basically echoing Enoch Powell, talking about Britain risking becoming an island of strangers. What do you make of that criticism? I'd love to hear your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. We'll get your calls up next. This is Talk.
put it in writing, and they basically replied and said, we can't remove him out of your theatre, but what we can do is we can cancel your surgery, we can move you to a different doctor with a different consultant at an unknown date. And I couldn't believe it. I said, well, you're prolonging my pain now because it needs to be done. It's like an emergency. With endometriosis, it's all over my bowels. It was a big operation. It's a joint case with the colorectal team. A lot of organisation went in. They just bypassed all that.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning. Welcome back to the show. It's 10:26. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Let's get to some of your messages coming in about these Labour MPs. And some of them suspended. John McDonnell, others who, by the way, almost became Chancellor of this country. I do think we need to remember that, how close we came. He's accused Keir Starmer of echoing Enoch Powell, his 1968 Rivers of Blood speech after the Prime Minister warned mass immigration risks making Britain an island of strangers. I think we were all surprised by his language because he's exactly the sort of person who would have accused anyone else saying that of echoing Enoch Powell, but now he's getting criticism from the left. But I'd love to know your reaction. Does that damage Keir Starmer? Does it help Keir Starmer? Does it just show how ridiculous the far left are? Has Keir Starmer convinced anybody? Your thoughts would very welcome. On text and tweets, David says, has any political party ever been more out of touch than these clowns? The Labour Party's got to go. Giles says, Labour MPs don't need to worry. He doesn't mean a word of it. This is also true. Lisa says, I don't believe a word he says. Elaine says, talk is cheap. Let's see if he actually does anything. He's a laughing stock right now. Zero backbone. Jane says simply, Starmer is lying. There's a lot of capital letters here. Mass immigration will continue. Millions will come in under LIBOR. I mean, this is true as well. Dean says he's believed his entire life that mass immigration is good for this country. He is an HR lawyer. Supporting it was a career choice for him. No way has he changed his mind. He's telling the public what they want to hear to save his own political skin. And Graham says Nigel Farage is clearly living rent-free in Starmer's head. Ain't that the truth as well? Let's go to your phone calls. Henry is on the line and he's in Brighton. Good morning to you, Henry.
Good morning, Julia.
This is how we're all chirpy when it's sunny. That's what we do.
That's right. Yeah. So comparing our Prime Minister with Enoch Powell is a slur on Enoch Powell. Enoch Powell was a scholar. He fought for our country in the Second World War. He was the youngest brigadier ever. Where, as far as I understand, Starmer is inviting the head of ISIS in Syria for a sort of a state visit to the UK.
This is true.
The man, look, when we heard and saw these videos of ISIS burning Yazidi women alive, it was him. When we saw the video of ISIS burning a captured Jordanian pilot alive, it was him.
This is the new Syrian leader. Yes, I mean, I was amazed by the sort of the liberal response. Like, well, Assad's bad, whoever takes over good, not necessarily. But again, we have to work with whoever foreign leaders are. But again, don't like red carpet being rolled out for Chinese presidents or Saudi crown princes. In terms of what Starmer had to say yesterday, did you, and the reaction particularly from Labour MPs, you're saying it's a slur on Enoch Powell rather than Keir Starmer, but what did you make of what he actually said and whether it will actually happen?
He's lying through his teeth, just like every promise he's made. I'm very up on this DEI, you know.
Yeah.
That means deport every illegal. Deport
oh, I'm stealing that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Deport them all as soon as possible.
I have to say, I'm always fascinated that anybody questions that, even down to the people who've overstayed their visas. They haven't come on, on a makeshift dinghy like 500 did yesterday, but they've arrived in this country legally on a tourist, work or student visa, and then they've overstayed often for many years. The idea that it's not completely correct for those people to be deported forthwith when identified, I find absolutely extraordinary that people wouldn't think, yeah, absolutely.
Well, yes, they're not immigrants, they're invaders. They're invading our country to steal our benefits.
Well, a lot of them will be working, actually. They're often, if they're here illegally, they're not able to claim benefits or not. But again, the main thing is, you don't, and I know that most of the Labour Party and most of the MPs don't actually agree with this, that you don't actually have a right to just live in any country you want to. You just don't. That's not how it works. But there we are.
Well, no, yeah, it's going to destroy our economy and destroy our culture.
Yep. No, I agree with you. Henry, thank you very much indeed. Richard is in London. He wants to talk about this as well. Good morning to you.
Hi, Judy. I mean, actually, I've always got to take issue more with Mr. Slater than
Tom Slater, yeah.
Because the way in which he just really rather denounced Powell. I mean, Powell made a point at the beginning of the 50s, which is basically saying that by the end of that decade even, there'd be people in Britain who were forced to live with other people who they thought they had nothing in common with. And you see, this is the sort of thing that people all around the world are allowed to say. I mean, not that long ago, you could still hear people saying, well, English should be for the English. Now, you wouldn't go to a Nigerian or Japanese and say that you can't say that Japan should be for the Japanese. So we have a
Japan has virtually zero immigration, actually, because the protection of their culture and language. And...
So we have we have almost a kind of self-enforced apartheid in the Western world, where no British politician can say Britain should be for the British, but of course anybody around the world can of course say that. And I think we have to be honest about the fact that we've always had integration problems in this country. If you go back to the case of Derek Bentley, who was involved in the killing of a policeman, and apparently when that happened in the 50s, the Home Secretary said somebody must hang for this because a policeman cannot be killed. Okay, that happened in the 50s. But if you go to the Tottenham riots in the 1980s, where a policeman was murdered in the most brutal way, look at the reaction of Margaret Thatcher, who was supposed to be anti-immigration. She said, or the government said, we must have community policing. So therefore, we must
I don't think those things are mutually exclusive, personally. Now, I'm just going to let Tom Slater just come back against that criticism. What do you want to say to Richard?
Well, on the kind of basis of, am I being unfair? Sorry, pardon me. Am I being unfair on Enoch Powell? I'm making a very simple point that is actually, if we think about some of the integration success stories over recent years, ones that I would hope that no one would take any issue with. You think about something, the contribution that, say, British Sikhs have made to this society. That was one of the issues that's alighted upon in the Rivers of Blood speech. Talks about the dispute in Wolverhampton over Sikh bus drivers being able to wear the turban. This is the level of kind of hostility that existed within that speech and within a strain of politics.
Do we have
that Powell
to see it within
represented.
its time, though, in terms of the... I mean, we have seen a massive cut in racism levels and concerns about race from people. Now, I don't think it is about race for most people.
No, absolutely. And also, this idea that I'm saying that anyone is not allowed to say these things. I'm a free speech absolutist. People can say whatever the hell they like. I am allowed, from my own vantage point historically, and also people very much made this point at the time, which is that the language that was used in that speech and also the apocalyptic predictions that it made,
was over the top,
which was not about numbers. That's the other thing. It was also about the idea that integration, even at the relatively historically low numbers that immigration numbers were running at that point, was not just unlikely but impossible and dangerous in Powell's
because
words.
People were so different.
So and that's a fundamental thing. Are we genuinely saying that only people who are white Anglo-Saxon can become British? If so, if that's your position, that's fine. But I'm just saying that that's what you're
disagreeing
That's clearly
with.
what we need
Richard,
to
we're going to have to leave it there. Tom got his say back. Thank you very much indeed. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to talk to Ben Habib, he's a former Brexit Party MEP, about what he makes about all these rows. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning, welcome back to the show. 10:36 is the time. Tom Slater's still with me. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer, and now we're joined by former Brexit Party MEP Ben Habib. A very good morning to you, Ben.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. A couple of questions I want to talk specifically about Keir Starmer's speech yesterday. One, the question we're putting to our audience in terms of him being accused of echoing Enoch Powell after the Prime Minister warned mass immigration risks Britain will risk making Britain, an island of strangers. First of all, do you think Keir Starmer was right to say that? And two, do you think that criticism from Labour MPs, well, mostly suspended Labour MPs, like John McDonnell and Zara Sultana, actually helps the Prime Minister?
Well, if he's trying to appeal to what he thinks are reform voters, then I suppose that criticism helps. Though I don't think the average reform voter fits into the kind of category that, Zara Sultana may have in her mind. It seems to me they think that the average reform voter is some kind of swivel-eyed right-wing lunatic, and that's not the case. Yeah, that may be the case. That may be what they think, but that is not reality. The vast majority of people who vote reform are sensible-minded British citizens who care about this country's economy, culture, constitution, and wish it to go forward in peace and prosperity, which is perfectly reasonable. And to compare what Starmer said in Parliament yesterday to Enoch Powell is completely wrong, because actually what we've got now is mass migration coupled with discrimination in favour of those who've come to this country, the setting aside of the democratic mandate, if you like. The interests of the majority have been set aside in the pursuit of the promotion and celebration of all the various minorities we've now got in this country. And we've made no tilt at all about, towards integration. Indeed, our policy of diversity, equity, and inclusion, as I was indicating, celebrates diversity, and people are encouraged to stay in their cultural silos. Yeah. And what we will see, and I think you touched on it earlier, is a breakdown. You talked about community policing and so on. We're going to see ever greater requirement for draconian policing as our society fragments. And in a sense, what I've just said doesn't make any sense, because society, the word society in itself means a settled culture. We don't have a settled culture in this country anymore. We struggle to define what it means to be British. I think a lot of politicians do. I don't think most British people do, of any background. No, I mean, I was just about to go on and say that when I was a child, I had no trouble defining what being British meant. But we set aside our understanding of our nation, our history, our culture, our beliefs, our values, in favor of a kind of codified Human Rights Act, which informs us about what we can and can't do, which was then built upon by the Equalities Act, and then all the progressive discrimination that went with it.
It's fascinating you brought that up, because that is all kind of part and parcel of this whole idea that sort of the majority, let's face it, the majority white native Britain of the past. Well, it's still a majority white, because but there's been massive changes racially, ethnically, religiously, and others in recent years. But that somehow was a bad thing, and what we've got now is a good thing, because diversity is our strength, etc. Whereas actually the evidence around the world is actually hugely diverse societies actually don't prosper as well as societies that are actually more cohesive. And again, I don't think that has to have anything to do with colour. I think it does, though, have issues with certain religions. It has issues with cultural norms and expectations and values and belief systems. So those are relevant. In terms of Keir Starmer speaking on this issue, saying things which, I mean, I'm absolutely flabbergasted by some of the stuff he said, because if the Tory leader had said stuff he said yesterday, if the Reform leader Nigel Farage had said it, if you said it, he would have called you all far right. He'd even said, oh, you sound like Enoch Powell. And now he's getting the criticism from the far left. I mean, look, admittedly, they're all completely nuts and wrong about everything. However, what do you make of the things that Keir Starmer had to say and the context in which he said them?
Well, Keir Starmer flip-flops from on just about every single issue when he thinks he needs to in order to curry favor with the electorate. He's not doing a very good job because his policies that he implements are absolutely disastrous for this country. But I think we've got to do away with this discourse that categorizes people either as left-wing or right-wing. It's such a dated and inappropriate for description. I know very few people who are right-wing. I would say Reform is actually not right-wing. If you look at some of Reform UK's policies, actually they're quite, they're quite sort of socialist in a sense, wanting to nationalise energy companies, for example.
That's not
right
socialist. That's actually remarkably normal in Western European countries.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
They're not. They can't be classified as a right-wing party. And I think the big difference in politics now is between those, and I would categorise Starmer firmly in this camp, those that wish to govern the country through global liberal principles and don't care whether migration is completely unchecked and don't really care what the composition of our demography is, don't care about the culture, our history, and so on. There's that lot, and Starmer's firmly in amongst them. And that those of us who recognise, in my view correctly, that in order for a peaceful, prosperous country, you need social cohesion. It is absolutely critical that you have social cohesion. We have to work together. It's the only way the country can go forward. We've got to have an identity in which we believe and which we're prepared to promote and fight for. And, we've seen that in certain statistics recently where the youth aren't prepared to go to war for this country.
Yeah.
That should be deeply, deeply worrying for anyone in government. And so it's not between left and right. It's about those of us who recognise the importance of social cohesion in our country and the economic prosperity that comes with it.
I think to a certain extent, as you say, it's between globalists and nationalists, people who actually recognise the concept of the nation state. I mean, people who think that anyone who comes to live here should have a right to vote here, as opposed to the concept of being a citizen and being entitled, therefore, to more rights. It's quite interesting, isn't it? In terms of, the extraordinary stats, Sun pointed this out yesterday, and it's in today's paper, that basically 500 people arrived illegally on boats across the Channel, and those dinghies yesterday. 200 of them while the Prime Minister was speaking yesterday morning because of the calm waters in the sunshine. That just makes a mockery, because the Prime Minister's talking about legal migration, which they've not got to grips with at all, and even on their promises doesn't touch the sides of what British population want. Long way from the tens of thousands. We're looking at around the 500,000 mark. I'm sorry, that is a net arrivals every year. That's not going to fly with voters at all. Even if it got down to 300,000, that's not going to be the right sort of number for most. But at the same time, illegal migration, the gang's not smashed, the boats are not stopped, completely out of control.
So the illegal migration thing is very interesting because our inability to enforce our borders, I think, stems from the same issues that we were talking about in terms of the Human Rights Act and the Equalities Act, where the Human Rights Act informs us in this country that everyone is equal. And so instead of discharging its primary obligation, which is the protection of this country and civil society in this country, actually the government is hijacked by the Human Rights Act and is seeking to protect those who are coming into this country illegally.
I think it's actually, and if you look at the European Convention on Human Rights, is that Article 8 the one that everyone's using to stay here because their son doesn't like chicken nuggets in Albania and the like? But actually, it's not just an interpretation; it's a complete misinterpretation of that Article 8. They're just ignoring the second paragraph of that article, which is about the Vista Society and law and order, etc., etc. But it's activist judges that are the problem. I think you could change the law tomorrow, wouldn't make any difference because we've still got the activist judge class.
I agree with that too, by the way. Even if you were to remove the Human Rights Act, you've still got a massive endemic problem with the judiciary, some of whom are members of things like Refugee Legal Support, an organisation that uses the ECHR and the Human Rights Act, weaponizes it to keep people here. But the slightly broader point I was making was that through the Human Rights Act, we've lost an understanding of what it means to be a British citizen because we've put all of humanity on a level pegging. Being a British citizen doesn't afford you any greater rights or protections in this country. And that's why we can't enforce our borders, because the Prime Minister sees those trying to enter the country illegally completely in the same light as those who are already here.
Yeah, I do think that's a very key problem. Ben, we're going to have to leave it there. Ben Habib, former Brexit Party MEP, thank you very much. Tom, do you want to come back in on this whole, is it left and right anymore? These, I mean, you're someone, you and I find ourselves agreeing quite an awful lot of issues, and yet you very much come from sort of, a Marxist left in your background, don't you?
Not that they would accept us as on the left anymore, I dare say, but I think
you're far right.
No, exactly.
Still, I mean, it's so difficult to keep up.
Who isn't? It's hard to tell these days. But it's one of those things where I think the left-right paradigm really doesn't make a lot of sense, because a lot of the things that say we at Spiked have always stood up for sovereignty, freedom, and so on, have become kind of right-wing coded for some bizarre kind of reason.
They should be, I would say, British values.
No, absolutely, and a sort of universal. So it's one of those things where I think a lot of the old political labels don't make a lot of sense anymore, and they also don't always make perfect sense of our politics, because you've got Reform who recognise that they've on certain policies they're looking to draw in an electorate who are actually quite left-wing in some respects, but also quite socially conservative in others.
People in this country are socially conservative. Economically, they are very much on the left-wing side. Tom said, thank you very much. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of that. 0344 499 1000. Don't say we don't cover the big issues here. Right now, though, time is right now to find out how you could be in with a chance of winning a weekend away in Munich at the end of May. It's rapidly approaching, folks. This is to watch the biggest game in European football. That's the Champions League final. We're also putting £5,000 in your pocket to spend however you want. Have a listen.
Win a once-in-a-lifetime trip to watch the Champions League final live. Go to talksport.com/win for your chance to embark on the ultimate odyssey of football ecstasy. With 2 tickets to the Champions League final live at the iconic Munich Football Arena, Germany, including flights, accommodation, and an uber-massive £5,000 in your hand.
How about that?
Enter online now at talksport.com/win. Terms and conditions apply. Achtung, baby.
18 plus UK, excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win all of that, simply text the word football to 83338 by the 16th of May at 11 p.m. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission, or send your name and number by post to Champions League final competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 21st of May. This is a TalkSport limited competition run on TalkSport Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Do not miss out on this brilliant giveaway from our colleagues at TalkSport. Very good luck with you for that. Up next, we're going to talk to Amy Gallagher about the latest woke madness. God, we could do the whole 3 hours on that every day. That's up next. This is Talk.
I mean, the fact of the matter is, as a member of parliament, you are gifted loads of things. You are genuinely told that there are certain things that you're able to keep, and you don't have to declare it if it's worth less than £300. I think about £300. So what's interesting is that it does really reveal the absolute lavish nature of a lot of what these members of parliament get. And I think what we have to be very clear about is any member of parliament that claims that they are hard done by, that the £80,000 or £90,000 now that members of parliament get as a salary, that's not all the benefits that they receive.
UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Tom Slater's still with us as well. Don't forget, I'd love to get more of your calls on air, and 0344 499 1000 is the number to call about anything we're talking about, in particular these MPs on Labour's benches, or suspended Labour MPs, accusing Keir Starmer of echoing Enoch Powell after the Prime Minister warned that mass immigration risks making Britain an island of strangers. I don't know why I've got a problem with it. It seems like a statement of fact to me, but there we are. Statements of fact, not very common, though, in our corporate world these days. We've seen the advent of the Pride, I would say the Pride year, not even Pride Month. It's no longer Pride, Gay Pride. It's now LGBTQAI plus Pride month. But a NatWest customer who complained about an LGBT Pride campaign at his local branch of NatWest was told to bank online. Known only as Mr. J. He went to NatWest last July and he said, I'm just unhappy about all of the Pride materials on display. Like, why on earth is this needed? My local supermarket does this ad nauseum as well. And basically said he's unhappy. And he said he was unhappy because of his disabilities. I'm not quite sure what they are, but also his religious beliefs. The bank pointed out that most of the services he required could have been done online, so basically what was the problem? And the Ombudsman, the Banking Ombudsman, Financial Ombudsman Service, after he escalated the complaint to them, have basically alleged the bank has failed to make adjustments required by the Equality Act, which prohibits discrimination on a number of personal characteristics. Let's talk about this with Amy Gallagher. She's a former NHS nurse and commentator at the New Culture Forum. Very good morning to you.
Morning, Julia.
So one of those rather complicated stories just involving a man walks into a bank, he's unhappy about some flags. Now, I can understand a lot of people going, it's just a flag, what's the issue? But I think a lot of us have got really fed up with this stuff being thrust down our throats. Day after day after day, it's the lanyards, it's the posters, it's the messages, it's the logos, it's all of that. And like someone just saying, I don't know why you have to do this. I'm unhappy about this. Why is this relevant when I go into my bank? It's a fair complaint, isn't it?
Yeah, NatWest have claimed that in showing these flags, they are delivering a better LGBTQ experience for customers. But there's no evidence that gay people or transgender people felt excluded from banks. It's not.
It was all the talk online. You can't go to NatWest because they haven't got some flags up.
And amazingly, NatWest have said in showing these flags, they are challenging the status quo. The Progress Pride flag is the status quo. It's in every institution, as you say, up and down the country. And this isn't new for NatWest. They've got form on this. They've previously offered healthcare benefits packages to their employees, which give free hormone treatment to their transgender employees. They've also encouraged previously staff to identify as different genders on different days and to display their pronouns on their
I'd
ID
lost
badge.
5 minutes there. By the way, do they give free IVF to their female employees?
It's a good point. Yeah, exactly. Why is it this one issue that's being pushed above all the other kind of protected characteristics? It's a very good point. And of course, there was the case of them debanking Nigel Farage for his political views. This is all being done, of course, because of Stonewall. They want to score highly on Stonewall's Workplace Equality Index. They're currently rated 45 out of the top 100 employers under Stonewall's.
Oh, well done.
So that's what this is all about. It has nothing to do with helping people or caring about their customers. Yeah. It's all about rankings and money.
And that's it. And that little world, the lanyard class, as we're now calling them. But this is the interesting thing. You say, good point, they're the ones who debank Nigel Farage, is it's not actually about them doing their job. It's about getting these rankings and Stonewall and getting applause and going to conferences, and we know they all love all of that. But again, I don't blame Stonewall for that. Look, they're just grifters. They basically, they've done their job, brilliant job in terms of gay rights, well done, fantastic work, and then they needed a new thing to keep them all employed and keep them relevant. So they've gone for the trans thing, and that, if companies are stupid enough to pay them thousands of pounds to get a little grading on, are you an ally to trans people and things like that, if they're stupid enough to do that, I always say I blame the management of these companies the most. I don't even blame the HR people who are also god awful at these places. I blame the management. It's up to them to not do this stupid stuff because it actually puts off more people. And no, I'm not transphobic, or definitely not homophobic. Definitely, I just don't know. I'm not interested. I don't even want them to have something saying, "Oh, we're not racist either." I didn't think you were.
No, I mean, it's one of the biggest questions of our age that always baffles me. Why does Stonewall have this authority? Why do so many people bow to Stonewall and say, OK, we'll do everything you tell us to do? Why do people care about the approval of Stonewall? You know, why has it become this big thing in our society? I do not understand it.
And the Supreme Court showed a month ago they've actually been given the wrong legal advice all this time on issues. Let's go on to transition. I know that's something that you've dealt with because you worked at the Tavistock Clinic and you've actually been very open about, you know, that you've been suspended from the NHS and you've been fighting a battle yourself. And we'll talk about that another time. But just very briefly, a story about a young female rugby player. This is Elena King. 20 years old. She suffered a horrible torn ACL, torn MCL back in January in the Netherlands after she was forced to play against, they say a transgender player, no, a man who claimed to be a woman, a male player who was supposed to be playing in a women's ring, but basically in a tackle, because basically he's so much bigger and stronger than her, caused her a serious injury. And again, this is what's been going on, the reality of this mad ideology being allowed to impact so many women.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't think men should be involved in any women's categories or any women's sports, but particularly the sports that are aggressive, like rugby or boxing. When men are allowed into those sports that are just for women, you are just legitimising male violence towards women. That's what's happening there. This particular male rugby player who plays on this women's team, he has form on this. He's caused injuries to previous players, and he's then returned, and then he's caused this injury to this woman. He's injured her kneecap, potentially a lifelong, injury. And get this, he then returns several weeks later and wins Player of the Match. What is going on
in a women's league?
In a women's league. What's going on in the Rugby Association, number one, but also what's going on in the minds of this man, that he's quite comfortable continually causing injuries to women and to then return. You know,
well, people will say, oh, well, men get injuries too, but the point is you've got they're completely different size. Men and women are different sizes. Their bone density, their muscle density is just a completely different thing. But this is the interesting thing. This has been happening. We know so many women are not getting injured because they're just not playing and they don't want to get showered next to this guy either. They are just withdrawing from the sport. Hopefully things will change from here after the Supreme Court ruling. This is something that happened in Holland, I think, in the Netherlands. So hopefully they're going to see sense as well. We seem to be at the forefront of this at Turf Island. But you've been a fantastic campaigner on this issue. I do appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us, Amy Gallagher. I'll get Tom Slater's thoughts on this because these are the things that just carrying on, I think just infuriating everybody. And again, another one of the things that when Keir Starmer says, oh, he now thinks that mass uncontrolled immigration is a bad thing, but he also now thinks that trans women are not women. So difficult to know what he thinks on any given day. I'm not entirely sure that he knows what he thinks on any given day, or indeed any given hour, because he changes his mind so often. We'll talk about all of that, plenty more besides, lots more of your calls. 0344 499 1000 is the number to get in touch. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning. Welcome back to the show. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Whether you're listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or your Connect device, it is fabulous to have your company. Also the company of the editor of Spiked Online, Tom Slater, who joins us regularly on a Tuesday. Great to have you here as well. Lots more to talk about, including coming up in this hour, the 21-year-old man who's been arrested over a series of arson attacks, including a fire at the Prime Minister Keir Starmer's family home in North London and at another resident linked to him and indeed to a car owned by the Starmer family. The man remains in police custody after being arrested by counter-terrorism police. We'll bring you any developments on that story if we do have any. Meanwhile, hundreds of migrants crossed the Channel in small boats yesterday morning as Keir Starmer stood in Downing Street promising to take back control of Britain's borders. You have to see the funny side, folks. Left-wing Labour MP John McDonnell, suspended from the party over his views on pretty much everything, is likened the Prime Minister's speech to Enoch Powell after Starmer warned that mass immigration risks making Britain an island of strangers. But did the Prime Minister say anything that was wrong? Love to hear your thoughts on that. Plus, a damning report has found that more than 400 ISIS jihadis who've carried out killings and terror attacks in Iraq and Syria have returned to the UK but not faced any justice at all. Certainly not behind bars. And Donald Trump has arrived in Saudi Arabia this morning at the start of his tour of the Middle East, but he said he could join peace talks between Vladimir Zelensky and Vladimir Putin in Istanbul on Thursday, assuming, of course, the Russian president actually turns up. The US president predicted a good outcome for the meeting. He's a lot more positive than the rest of us, but that's because he's believing things that Putin says. Anyway, all that coming up, plenty more besides. Love to hear from you today on all the topics we're talking about, but in particular on these Labour MPs. Well, two of them are suspended Labour MPs, Zora Sultana and John McDonnell, who's almost the Chancellor of this country, people, almost, in 2017. Labour MPs have accused Keir Starmer of echoing Enoch Powell and his Rivers of Blood speech in 1968 after the PM warned mass immigration risks making Britain an island of strangers. What do you make of that? What's your reaction to what the Labour and suspended Labour MPs are saying? What do you make of what he actually said, those words? And do you think in any way this is actually going to, after upsetting the left of his party, going to actually appeal to anyone on, well, he would say right wing, I would say simply the moderate middle. Love to hear your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1. Standard network rate message. Tom Slater, I'll put that question to you again. We were discussing it earlier, but it is, the biggest topic this week so far. We'll see what happens later in this week. It is extraordinary that the Prime Minister has the criticism from the right, such as we're going to call it left and right. We've had conversations the last half hour that do these things have meaning. You know what I mean roughly by that. But criticisms on the right basically saying, we don't believe a word you say. 5 minutes ago you were saying open borders and calling anyone who talked about this stuff far right and the like, and racist and bigoted. Now you're saying this because you're worried about reform. Prime Minister saying he believes in what he's saying. The left of his party and those who were suspended from his party for being too far out of beyond the pale, like John McDonnell, they're accusing him of being far right himself. They're accusing him of being Enoch Powell. What do you make of him kind of caught in the middle? And do you think this is going to pay off for him?
Well, only in the immediate short term, because it's upset the right kind of people. And if the point of that speech was to strike a very clear note that Labour want to tackle immigration, that even if it doesn't convince a whole swathe of voters who might have abandoned them previously, maybe it will convince enough to think that they're a safe pair of hands on this front. But, you look under the bonnet, it's so clear that this is going to make nowhere near enough difference, even if all of their estimates turn out to be correct. Yeah. In terms of bringing numbers down. 100,000 is the number the Home Office thinks they're going to get it down. 100,000 a year, but it's currently at 728,000. And it's going to be nowhere near what it was before Brexit, let alone when the last Labour government left office. So if you're a voter who's particularly concerned about this issue, who wants it to be tackled, this is going to look like more tinkering around the edges.
Because that's what it is.
No, absolutely.
Even though I think all the measures individually are good.
And it's one of those things where if absent reform, if reform weren't on the march in the way that they are currently, this could have been smarter play for Labour, because the issue has been neutralised for the Tories because they've so fundamentally failed. They said one thing and did another. They basically perpetrate a form of political fraud on the electorate over many elections. Even Boris Johnson was elected on a ticket of reducing migration. He kept the numbers vague, but still, and they've delivered it in absolutely record numbers. If you didn't have reform coming through, it would have been a lot easier for Labour to use this as an opportunity to not necessarily gain credibility, but the issue's been neutralised.
No, but they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't have done it. Because
that may well
no
be the
one
case,
actually believes that Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer, who have basically, I mean, the quotes are I mean, there are just so many quotes every time that they've supported mass immigration. I mean, and Keir Starmer back in 2020 got elected. He said he promised to have an immigration system based on compassion and dignity, end indefinite detention, called for the closure of centres like Yarlswood and like. But I mean, he said, you know, that he authored it back in 1988. Yeah, people might have changed their views since then. He was probably at uni then. He authored a review of immigration law and practice, in which he argued that all immigration law is racist. I mean, Yvette Cooper was literally 2015 with the Syrian refugees. Come on in the waters, lovely. I mean, every time that someone has ever talked about cutting migration levels, whoever it is, anyone on the front bench has at some point said that's xenophobic, that's racist, you can't do that. They are pretty much in favour of open borders.
Oh, no,
not just with the EU.
But they also, what I suppose has been telling is that they recognise even before the election that they had to start at least pretending to tilt in this direction.
Lip service.
You know, you had Keir Starmer saying that the open borders experiment of the Tories has been a disaster. Even in the election campaign, he was talking about how legal immigration has got completely out of control. It's a complete failure. We need to bring it down. The thing is, that could have worked, and that could have shored up some support about people who are otherwise a bit sceptical about the Labour Party, because we all know that they don't believe what they're saying on questions like immigration. If you didn't have reform, he was just eating not only the Tories' lunch but increasingly Labour's as well. So it's one of those things where I think he's going to get a hell of a lot of flack and not bank a lot of benefit for it.
That's where I am. It's a losing game, but it is untenable to continue the Labour policy, the support for this. And again, you could get away with it when the Tories said the right things but were useless at doing the right things, which they were. And they did, as you say, categorically. And Boris Johnson, the people... It absolutely breaks my soul that there are people who are still pushing. Daily Mail apparently still think, Boris Johnson is a winner. These polls more in common, others suggesting he's the man who could rescue the Tories. This is abject nonsense. As Farage would point out every single day, he's the author of the Boris bounce. It wasn't when people voted for Brexit. It wasn't because everyone was angry about immigration. It was a factor. The key thing was we wanted to have control. What we didn't want is politicians going, oh, it's not our problem, nothing to do with us. What we want is people to say, we want you to be accountable to us. That's what we want. And we said we want to take back control and we get Brexit done. We didn't give a free for all for Boris Johnson to allow 1.2 million people into the country in 1 year, more than left. I mean, the numbers are staggering. They are staggering. We're letting in we're letting in basically the best part of Birmingham every single year. We're not building a new Birmingham every year. They've got to live somewhere. The numbers don't add up, quite apart from the cultural integration issues. I mean, the economic numbers don't add up, the cultural integration actually don't add up. I said to a friend the other day, I said, what do you think immigration was? They say it hasn't got that big. I mean, it started under Blair. But what do you think it was before Blair and the Eastern Europeans, basically the door being open to the the accession states? Of course, I think wasn't it the prediction from the Home Office 13,000 people would come, and it ended up being, I think, 500,000, give or take, only in a few years later. But I said, what do you think? What is our rough history in terms of the number of people net arriving in this country? And they were like, 100,000, couple of, no, 20 to 30,000. That was the norm. And yet we were able to run social care. We were able to run the NHS. We were able to do all of these things. We had people to do these jobs. And now miraculously we don't, when we've got 9 million people who are working age who are not working. OK, 4 million of those, carers, students, doing other things. We've got 5 million people, best part of, who are either on unemployed, on sickness benefits of some questionable sort or not, who could be doing these jobs. We need to train these people up. We deliberately limit the number of people who can train as doctors and nurses. Then we say, we haven't got enough doctors and nurses, we need to import them. We have an insane economy.
And it's the way in which immigration is being used to basically mask failure elsewhere in the system. Is shocking.
Failure in training, failure in skills, education, growth, and failure in welfare.
Productivity and so on. I mean, the fact that it's just has artificially kept GDP numbers up, whereas if you look at GDP per head, it's clearly going pretty much in the other direction. is shocking, and it's something which is it's so telling that in the discussions about this, you have people who suddenly just start to look into the middle distance and talk about values and so on. That's all fine and good. A lot of those things I'm sure we agree on. That's not the material issues that we're talking about, which is that the kind of, welcoming the water's lovely, let's build a great society together and all be integrated and whatever. It's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about immigration being used to mask failures, meanwhile integration being actively mitigated against under this policy of multiculturalism. It's a terrible mix. Ordinary people have noticed this for a while. The politicians have noticed it about 5 minutes ago, and it's telling that they still struggle to articulate some of these issues.
Do you think they didn't notice? I mean, look, David Cameron made speeches about this. I mean, if everyone has made speeches about this and pointed it out and then done absolutely zero about it, because I don't know how they can ignore it. Now, and I've pointed this out a million times before, but I'm carrying on. As someone who lives in that sort of North London middle-class world, I know these people. My family knows these people.
You walk amongst these people.
I walk amongst these people, and they sort of hiss at me as I walk past them on Hampstead Heath. It's great fun. They despise me. Oh, for Julia. I literally have people, Julia Hartley-Brewer. It's wonderful, and I have a big beam on my face. It genuinely happens. It's a joy to me. It really is. But genuinely, I know how they think, and they and I benefit from it as well. It's like, if your job isn't being taken, if you're not competing for people who are new arrivals on low skilled, low income jobs where the wages are not ever going to go up because they never have to, because we can just import more people. If you're not competing for that level of housing, whether it's social housing, council housing, whether it's in the rental market, if you are not having to send your kid to a local, absolutely, completely well below, bog standard, sink local school where lots of kids turn up who can't speak English as first language. Yes, I know London schools have done very well with a lot of immigrant children. Yeah, certain immigrant groups do fantastically well because the emphasis on family and education. Other immigrant groups don't do so well, and a lot of it depends on whether the children speak English fluently or not. These are key factors. If you're not competing on this, you're not impacted by that, then you're fine. All you're doing is sitting there going, oh good, I've got a lovely cheap nanny. I've got a lovely builder, whether it's from Poland or nanny from wherever. I've got the coffee is cheap. All of the goods I buy in the supermarket are cheaper because we've got foreign people picking them from the ground. I mean, you are living in a world where you get all the benefits of this, and you can go, oh, we've got a lovely local deli. I mean, frankly, sod off. These people are completely and utterly ignoring the huge impact that these changes have made, not just the numbers, but the cultural changes I have on local neighbourhoods of many other people, and they're living in cloud cuckoo land.
No, they don't know the nation in which they're talking about, and you see that even when they suggest that to be concerned about mass immigration combined with multiculturalism, all these issues that we're talking about, the way in which it's being used to prop up a stuttering economy, to act as if that's a kind of racist thing is bizarre. Some of the most migration sceptical people I know are of immigrant background.
Because they're often at the bottom of the pile, and they're the ones being hurt the worst.
Absolutely. They're as concerned as anyone else about the housing shortages and the way that's going to pan out for their children. A third of ethnic minorities voted for Brexit. I mean, this is something which I find so bizarre. Meanwhile, the people who are trying to pretend that these changes haven't taken place, trying to pretend that there's no problem whatsoever, often white as driven snow. So it's one of those bizarre kind of factors of this debate. They don't know the country they live in many different respects.
They really do not, do they? Let me talk about something completely different. Let's talk about the US president. He's in the Middle East. He's arrived. As many Western leaders do, he arrives in places like Saudi Arabia, and everyone just pretends that they're normal countries, and everyone pretends that the Crown Prince there is a wonderful reformist. He's actually, listened on the telephone as a Western journalist was slaughtered and his body cut up in the Saudi embassy in Saudi Arabia, in Istanbul. Let's not forget that. It's a small point, I think, worth making. This man is a murderous dictator, a tyrant. However, he's better than the alternative in Saudi Arabia, which is why we do business with him, because it's either him or the jihadis. Those are the choices we make. However, we've got Donald Trump over doing a tour of the Middle East, the potentates. He's not going to Israel, which I think is very telling. Israeli government by all means said, please come and include us in your 4-day trip. He's talked about possibly going to Istanbul if Vladimir Putin turns up for talks with Zelensky for peace in Ukraine. Got a lot of balls in the air there. Meanwhile, he's accepted a $400 million gift from the Qatari government of a new Air Force One jet, jumbo jet. What do you make of this?
It's an incredible story, isn't it? It's something which has proven incredibly controversial, even amongst Trump's sort of own base, the sort of influence around him, the propagandists around him. It's seen as a tremendous own goal, not partly because of how crooked it looks like, but also for all the reasons we know about Qatar. I mean, Qatar is basically the political base of Hamas. I mean, Qatar has been harbouring these people for a very long time. This is not a pleasant regime by any stretch of the imagination.
They're given far too much credit in negotiating hostage releases and the like.
No, exactly. I mean, they're basically just the sort of office space for Hamas and its Politburo, and has been for a very long time, allowed those...
And not just Hamas, Hezbollah, other leaders, able to... But this
giving
is the
them a base to enrich themselves.
There are various aspects here. One is there's actually part of the American Constitution is you're not allowed to take gifts from foreign governments. It's inappropriate. Apart from the bribery aspect, there's this concern that the plane is going to go after the term of office of the president is going to go to his presidential library. So yeah, I'm sure that multi-million-dollar...
How big is this library?
Yeah, exactly. It's a big library. Hangar, I reckon that's going to be used occasionally, isn't it, by the Trump family? I think we can safely say. But I mean, President saying, look, it's all open above board, so how can it be dodgy? I mean, this is not a strong argument. It's like the argument of if we elect really, really rich people, they won't be able to bribery and corruption. Yeah, because that's absolutely the thing we know about very rich people. They're not motivated by money. That's the really key fact we know about them. But also the fact that Qatar, I say, harbouring all these terrorist groups, Qatar's not our friend. The idea that your foreign government in the Middle East could build this plane, I mean, apparently it's sitting in America already, but that's surely a security risk, isn't it? God knows what have been implanted into it.
I mean, there's even been, security risks within the West from time to time, like when Angela Merkel found out her phone was being tapped by the Obama administration government. It's one of those things
or maybe you've just put your story out to a journalist in America. Exactly. You plan to bomb the Houthi rebels.
You've got to be sensible, even when you're dealing with friends, let alone with people who are very diametrically opposed to your interests. And it's that thing with Trump, isn't it? I think he likes to play up to this idea that almost like he's almost nakedly corrupt, and that's why you can trust him. But there's a certain point in which, yes, you're a very rich guy, but then maybe that just means that the gifts have to get bigger and bigger to the point where they're the size of a plane, rather than actually means that he won't take them when they're offered to him. So yeah, it's a bad look from top to bottom, I would say. And I do wonder whether, given the noise that now surrounds this, he'll quietly back away.
I think he'll carry on taking, but there we are. Can I also look just finally at Lucy Connley, who's always referred to actually in articles as like the wife of a former Tory councillor. She is the woman who was given a 31-month sentence after she pleaded guilty to a racial crime for a tweet that she wrote about migrants on the day of the Southport attack in the worst of the wake of that killings by Axel Rudikabana. She pleaded guilty. A lot was reported at the time, but actually was not very accurate. I've seen reports today. She pleaded guilty, and there were other racist tweets. Well, this is what the police claimed were racist. Absolutely. I mean, she should never have pleaded guilty. If she'd gone to the Free Speech Union, I'm sure they would have advised her don't plead guilty, and she would have actually got off. Horrible tweet, clearly racist, clearly horrible. Set fire to all the hostels with all the lots of bad words in it. Foul. She deleted it 4 hours later after a few 100,000 people had read it. No evidence whatsoever that anyone was motivated by it. I think it was a horrible tweet. I think we were allowed to judge her for it. Loads that's come out about this woman since. The fact that she is a childminder. She's a carer for her children and for her sick husband. But the fact that she's a childminder to many children who are of immigrant families. And those families, by the way, all gave statements in her defence about what a wonderful woman was and how absolutely she's not racist and everything. She's a woman who had lost a child herself a few years earlier and was very traumatised by the news that children had been killed and stabbed in that awful attack in Southport. I think it's one of those things that she should have had a slap on the wrist and gone home. She hasn't even been allowed out for weekend release, which violent criminals, women have been allowed to do. She's got an appeal in court on Thursday. We'll certainly be covering that here at Talk. Should she be let out? I mean, the likes of Liz Truss and others are saying that not only should she be able to get home weekend visits with her family, her daughter apparently suffering at school and the like, but there's just no way she should be behind bars.
No, there's no plausible case in my mind that she should be. The idea that she's a kind of danger to society is clearly not the case. You can, exactly as you say, condemn the comments that she'd made. I don't think anyone should dismiss this as someone, having a bit of a bad day or being upset by the events.
There are
in Southport.
consequences.
There are a lot of people who saw those horrendous events. They didn't instantly go to social media and start talking darkly about migrant hotels going up in flames. There were despicable comments. That being said, I don't think people should be put behind bars for despicable comments. Do we really think this was going to lead to further unrest? Do we really think that the people who went and did those despicable things, rather than just said despicable
had read
things,
Lucy Connley's
exactly,
tweet?
it's an absurdity, and it was just because
And she
of the
wasn't
fact that
saying,
it was all...
everyone, meet at 4 o'clock. At this
Here's the
hostel,
place,
we're going to burn
bring the
down
torches,
this.
etc.
Now, if she'd
Very
done
different
that,
kettle of fish.
absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Now, at the time, reading the reports, there were court. I'm not talking about reading what people were saying on Twitter. At the time, there were court reports saying there were other racist tweets. But I thought and said, bang to rights. You know, lock and throw away the key. I was really horrified by what she said. But I don't think the reporting was fair. I don't think the court case was fair. I don't think the legal advice a lot of these people got. I think most of the people who were put away for things they wrote as opposed to things they did. You turn up and throw bricks or try and set fire, intimidate people, I want you in prison, got no issue with that. But we know there are people who've committed the most heinous crimes who don't get a day behind bars.
And if you look at not just the ins and outs of Lucy Connley's case, but also, say, the Jamie Michael case, a gentleman from Wales who was one of the few who actually pleaded not guilty. It was over a video in which there was no racist comments on there whatsoever. He was just talking about the need to, because at that point there was this speculation that it might have been some kind of radicalised asylum seeker. He was just saying we need to have a public meeting about this, we need to do something about it, there are some radicalised idiots who we need to get on top of. He was arrested, you know, he was dragged through the process. It was only out of his own kind of bloody-mindedness that he continued to plead not guilty to the point where the Free Speech Union found out about him. And you hear his story.
But people weren't being given bail, that was the key thing.
Exactly, and his story was Kafkaesque. They wouldn't, the transcript for the video was wrong. All these kind of basic things that really doesn't give you any much hope that these cases were dealt with in anything like a serious
Well,
fashion.
I mean, I suppose the main thing is at least they didn't have any very Brexity things in their homes. We were talking about that case yesterday of a former police officer. In fact, there's actually going to be the police are reviewing that case of a man who's a former special constable for comments that are just totally and utterly nothing wrong with them whatsoever. It is really extraordinary. And again, I know you talk about this a lot. I talk about this a lot. Free Speech Union doing amazing work campaigning it. I know we're both big fans of the union. I remember, I think you are as well. But I just find it extraordinary. This stuff is still happening. And as we were discussing on the show yesterday, no heads ever roll. They do this, and the people who send these coppers along to meet this, the CPS prosecuting, no heads ever roll when these are such blatant infringements of our fundamental human rights.
No, and that needs to change. You can't have a situation where time and time again they're handcuffing people, often for the most trivial of things, like this horrendous Julian Faulks case, and then it's like, oh whoops, we won't do it again.
But you do it tomorrow,
and they don't even notice themselves. It always takes someone else to point out that this was insane that you gave this man a caution. Can you strip it from his record? And 2 years later they do it with a bit of an apology. That's not good enough.
I'm still absolutely stunned, having waited many months to get my report back from the Metropolitan Police, that I do not have any non-crime hate incidents recorded against me.
I'm so sorry to hear that. You've really been trying as well.
I have to say, I frankly, I don't know what I've been doing with my time. I find it extraordinary that I don't have one, but you know, sorrows. 11:25 is the time. We're going to take a break and we'll hear from you. 0344 499 1000 on everything we're talking about, including what Keir Starmer had to say, where he's been accused by some Labour MPs of echoing Enoch Powell for talking about Britain becoming an island of strangers if we keep on with uncontrolled mass immigration. Your thoughts? Very welcome. This is Talk.
We know that over the past 3 years he's been on countless foreign jet-setting luxury trips around the world at our expense. He says it's to foster relations with foreign countries and to tell them how wrong Russia was to invade Ukraine. I'm not sure what that has got to do with the Speaker, but there you are. He spent about £300,000 over the last 3 years going on these luxury trips.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning. Welcome back to the show. 11:28 is the time. Let's get to your calls. Coming in thick and fast about Labour MPs accusing Keir Starmer of echoing Enoch Powell after the PM yesterday said that mass immigration risks making Britain an island of strangers. I mean, I'm not quite sure what he said that was wrong. Big battles between left and right, such as those labels make any sense anymore. What are your thoughts? 0344 499 1000. Actually, I'll get to a couple of your texts and tweets first. Janice says, this is like shutting the gate after letting everyone through. Too little, too late. The British Isles are lost to mass immigration. Darcy says, we want Labour out. Time for real change. Don't trust Starmer and Cooper to sort this out. And Brenda says, the only real winner this week is Rachel Reeves. Why? Because nobody's talking about her incompetence for a change. Very good point. Georgina is on the line in London. A very good morning to you, Georgina.
Good morning, you gorgeous girl. And good morning to Tom also.
Oh, you didn't get gorgeous, though.
No, I didn't.
That would have been sexual harassment, so it's a good thing. It's a good thing. Georgina, what do you want to say, my love?
Well, it's about a dreary Keir Starmer. I mean, I'm totally confused. Keir Starmer is now public enemy number one. I don't know anymore, and I don't think he does know, what he and his party stand for. It wouldn't surprise me to see him at the next Reform rally taking notes. He seems to have turned into some kind of political shapeshifter,
yes,
and trying to be all things to all men, going so far as to plagiarise the policies of opposing parties to try and claw back a few followers.
Do you think he believes in anything that he says?
No, I don't think he knows anymore. I think the poor guy, and I honestly, that sticks in my craw to say it, but he's damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. The public hate him, and so do his own party now, by the look of things. I mean, he's totally lost his own party's identity by doing a 360-degree shift on a once steadfast Labour value and policy ideal.
Yeah. But it's the same. I liken it again. It's the same thing as the trans women and women thing. One day he thought that, and the next day he didn't. One day he thought that open borders and mass immigration was brilliant culturally and economically, and the next day he didn't. I never... One thing that really frustrates me is when people do, the political journalists, the ones who fail to ask any real questions during lockdown, but they never ask the really key questions. It's like, when did you change your mind on this, and what was the reason for that change in mind? What facts were you suddenly aware of that made you think differently?
Yeah, but the thing is, Julia, you can't have a Prime Minister that changes his policies as often as he changes his undergarments. This is a man who's lost his way, and it shows. He looked like a fish out of water at his last address, and he's firmly on a hook. He's showing both indecision and weakness at every corner now, and the vultures are circling him. You know, he's both uncomfortable and he's in uncharted territory. And for Keir Starmer, this is a life changer. You know, I don't think it's going to be long until he either throws in the towel or is ousted out.
Well, that's it. One of the theories seems to be now that, you know, the reason why he had this language and it was written, you know, was it different, was it not? And Mike Graham was talking about this earlier. Are his own people trying to get rid of him? I mean, I don't know who they think is going to come in instead. Georgina, I just wish you were in the Commons. It would be just fantastic to have you at PMQs. Thank you so much for your call. Tonya's on the line in Exeter. Now, Tonya, you want to talk about this Mr. J goes into his local NatWest bank and is confronted with a whole load of LGBTQIA plus pride flags last July, complains and is told, well, go and bank online then. What do you want to say?
Oh, right, yeah, about that. Well, firstly, all the pride stuff is everywhere. I drive from that.
Tonya, can I ask something? You've gone very, very fuzzy. I don't know if you're on speakerphone or anything. Could you speak a bit more into your phone so we can hear you a bit better?
Yeah, hello, can you hear me
that's
now?
better. What were you doing before?
It's an old-fashioned phone.
Oh, is it a brick? Is it a Nokia? Is it a Nokia 310 or whatever?
Yeah, it's one of those little things. One of those little things.
What do you want to say? Sorry, talk about NatWest.
Right, okay, so what I'm saying, yeah, it's just the pride stuff. Okay, I'm gay, but it drives me mad, all this blooming pride stuff everywhere, and I'll tell you why. Because it doesn't help gay and transgender people. It's nothing to do with us, okay?
Yeah.
It's to do with the political lobby.
Yeah.
And it's actually, I believe, it's designed to actually get a backlash against gay people to divide and rule. That's why they're really doing it, I think, the political lobby. I don't think
That's interesting. And it has prompted a backlash, which is really sad.
It has. And I find now, where it took me till I was in, I didn't come out for a long time because my family weren't supportive, okay? They weren't supportive. So it took me years till I came out. And in my I think it was very late 30s, almost 40 before I came out.
Yeah.
And what I would say is that instead of helping me, and at that point, and I also believed I was transgender, but I agree you cannot change sex, but I've always felt like a man trapped in a woman's body, okay? Now, and I sort of dressed up as a man, I called myself by a male name, but I know you can't change sex. And I've also got the autistic tendency thing, okay? So I've got that. And I think, right, that what it did to me was where I was okay about myself, and I'd finally come to feeling okay about myself and who I was, it pushed me right back to I won't tell anyone. I just keep it to myself. I don't even say I'm gay. I just keep it to myself.
I don't know what sounding gay is or even looking gay is. I mean, but that's the thing. Lots of people who are gay or people wanting to live as if they were trans, just quietly living their lives, and then suddenly it's pushed onto, everyone has to talk about it all the time. I often think, with all due respect, everyone, it's the least interesting thing about people. But there we are. I'd rather people talked about other things. And I would be talking about other things a lot more if it hadn't been for the issue for women's rights and safety. Tonya, I so appreciate your call. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you sharing that with us. I'm going to move on because I'm already very late for a break. And coming up, we are going to be talking to Mesa Gifford. He's a former British volunteer fighter in both Syria and Ukraine. Going to talk to him about those ISIS jihadis returning from Syria and Iraq. And also, are we looking at possibility of peace in Ukraine? This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, for me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Let's talk to our next guest now. He's Mesa Gifford. He's a former British volunteer fighter in both Syria and Ukraine, and also author of the book Fighting Evil, The Ordinary Man Who Went to War Against ISIS. A very good morning to you, Mesa.
Good morning.
What an apposite guest to have, given the two topics I want to talk to you about, both involving the ISIS jihadis returning to the UK and prospect of perhaps, who knows, peace in Ukraine. Let's start with the ISIS jihadis, though. Reports that some 400 ISIS jihadis and some, jihadi brides, as they're known, have been able to return to the UK without facing any proper justice whatsoever. Frankly, even if they did face justice and were charged with any of the crimes they almost certainly committed whilst out in Syria, Iraq, they would already be spending a few months behind bars, if at all. But this is a big concern, isn't it?
Well, it's a massive concern. I mean, a lot of people have been talking about this for over a decade now. The trouble is, only 1 in 10 have ever faced any form of courtroom. And those that have and have been found guilty have often been let off with considerably lighter sentences.
Yeah.
Than they deserve, because the legislation really is not there, and we've had years to prepare for the eventuality that more and more prisoners of the Kurds, of ISIS, will be returning back to the UK.
Yeah, because basically these people were captured, they're held in these internment camps, the place where, one of the places we found Jamima Begum, and now they're just gradually making their way home, and we're just supposed to go, yeah, absolutely, you've been beheading people, killing people, organised rape of Yazidi women, no problem. Come back and we'll just pretend it never happened.
70,000, more than 70,000 ISIS prisoners are in Kurdish camps. Many of these, thousands of these, are the most violent people on the planet. These people are actually far worse than Shamima Begum. Shamima Begum actually has been accused of far more horrific crimes than many of the people, the typical apologizers, often on the left, have given her credit for. But that aside, there are far worse people than her, people who are completely fanatical, have shown no regret for what they've done, and actually have received the most brutal training, ideological and military, that presents a real risk to the public. So it's about time we were put forward. The public was put forward as the primary concern on this one.
Yeah, and that's the issue. It's bad enough that, we import people. I mean, a huge number of our terror attacks in this country have been people who've come to this country or have certainly experienced, as a child experiences. We know the impact of seeing these, not even just committing these crimes, but being around that brutality is huge on people. And look, you
Just a good example, by the way.
Just give us an idea of what when you were out there fighting on behalf of the good forces against these ISIS terrorists. Just the sort of thing that was being carried out in the name of ISIS.
Well, I think many of us have got very short memories, it seems, because it was all over the press. The images of the Yazidi girls burnt alive in cages, being sold in the sex market, Raqqa and Mosul. When I was on the ground, I saw communities completely ripped apart by their violence, by their thuggery. And this bleeds into many topical issues, whether they should be prosecuted, but also the illegal boats that come across the channel. We don't know exactly who's coming into our country even today. And the real threat of the challenge of dealing with these 70, 80,000 fighters who are on the ground in Syria right now and at risk of getting out, many of those could make their way to the UK quite easily. And not even, far from us prosecuting them, we may not even know they're here. So the stiffening our border legislation, stiffening our sort of laws to make it easier to prosecute these people, it is all part of a coherent strategy that we need to put together, and we need to do it urgently.
Absolutely, and it is extraordinary actually. When Yvette Cooper made a statement in the House of Commons yesterday about Keir Starmer's announcement on the immigration white paper from yesterday morning, and when Nigel Farage got up and was talking about we don't know if terrorists are coming through on the illegal on the channel boats, there were sort of cries of shame and the like. But the security services have said just this.
Yeah, and we're just not listening to them because MI5 has already described people like Shamima Begum as a real and credible threat. Yet you still have people either in Parliament, also in the public sphere, whether it's journalists, etc., saying, "Oh, she's somehow a victim," and all the rest.
Yeah,
of it.
because she was groomed. I have to say, I've always been of the view that, again, my view is, I think she's our problem. I think we should have her home, but only if she can be in prison. And I know even if she got charged with anything, which is unlikely, she'd be out in a couple of months. And therefore, I don't want her back. But I still personally think she's our problem.
No, I get that. So I recognise that argument. I've always been quite vocal in my determination to keep her and all of them out. I do like there is some very robust legislation about removing citizenship for people accused of war worst crimes. I think that should be built upon. There are far more things that we can do to deter people accused of the most dreadful crimes who come into the UK. Bearing in mind, we've also heard about incidences of Taliban members having a right to a family life in the UK and all the rest of it. So
don't get me started, Mesa. Don't get me started. Let's also talk about Ukraine. You also fought in Ukraine, and again on the right side of history. There is this basically this sort of offer of ceasefire talks or peace talks in Istanbul, hosted by the Turkish President Erdogan on Thursday. Basically, the call has gone out for there to be a ceasefire beforehand. Zelensky's basically called Putin's bluff and gone, look, OK, I'll turn up in Istanbul on Thursday. I'll wait for you to turn up, Vladimir. Donald Trump is now doing his little Middle East tour. He's in Saudi Arabia today, but talked about how, if he thinks things are going well, basically he'll want to turn up and take part of the glory, not let President Erdogan take it. But do you think there's any possibility, A, of Vladimir Putin turning up, and B, those talks resulting in anything close to peace?
I am sceptical, I have to say. We are seeing the green shoots of a negotiation going on, but I think there is a real disconnect in America particularly about Russia's willingness to negotiate and their willingness to seek peace. Vladimir Putin started this war because he truly believes that Ukraine is part of Russia, it's an integral part. He has got this completely deluded sense of not only self but also the sort of purpose and future of his own country and where Ukraine sits in that. So without that realization that Vladimir Putin is very much part of the problem, and by ceding so much to him over the last couple of months, we are literally negotiating away our own position here by simply saying, automatically recognizing Crimea being of Russia, recognizing that Russia has a right to Ukraine. There's so much we've given up already.
Yeah, the starting point. Well, not we, Donald Trump gave it up. The starting point was kind of the worst case scenario end point at one point, wasn't it? In terms of the men, look, you fought, actually on the front line in Ukraine early on in the war. In terms of the men that you fought alongside and the men and women, the families that you would have met as various towns and villages and cities got liberated from those advancing Russian forces, what would they say? What would they want? Because we're often told, hey, we need to end the meat grinder, we need to get these people back to normal life, and if that means giving up territory, that's something the Ukrainians would do. Is that what the men and women you fought alongside would be willing to do?
Well, there's absolutely not, is the short answer. The more complicated answer is the beauty of serving alongside these people is you get to meet so many people from all walks of life. And what has been so wonderful to see in Ukraine is that from the guys who pulled your pints in the bar to the waiters to the middle class, the dentists, all the rest, all they came together to defend their country, very much like the queues of people outside the offices, recruiting offices during the Second and First World War in our own country. Ukraine is under threat, and it is their future we're now supposedly negotiating over, and we should be listening to them. The vast majority want the tools to do, as Winston Churchill said, give us the tools, we'll do the job. That's very much the purpose here. But it is a democracy. I met a couple of guys on the front line who said to me that they wouldn't mind negotiating over certain aspects of land for peace. They wanted a sustainable peace and all the rest of it. The vast majority were far more defiant. So that there's a debate going internally in Ukraine, but the real challenge here is listening to them and making sure that they're the ones that are heard and not the short-term interest of America and etc.
Absolutely. Mesa Gifford, always so good to talk to you, a former British volunteer fighter in both Syria and Ukraine. Thank you so much for joining us. Tom Slater, let's talk about Ukraine first of all. Do you think there's any likelihood of this happening? I mean, Zelensky is totally calling Putin's bluff, and the hope there is really trying to persuade Donald Trump. This is what it's all about. You're not going to persuade Putin to do anything. Persuading Donald Trump to get the fact that he's being played by Vlad.
And the hope is that the penny is starting to drop. You had those messages from Trump a couple of weeks ago suggesting that maybe Putin isn't the great guy that I thought he was after all. That was generally the drift of it. And I think that was always going to be the thing that would cut through with Trump most, which is, you can make the moral arguments to him, you could talk about all this, that, and the third. It was the point at which he felt like he was being taken for a sucker that
and people
he
are
would
laughing
start
at him.
to turn a little bit. And you can only hope that that's what's beginning to take place.
And in America, we often get this idea that, everyone, he's voted for, he's the majority president, absolutely, and the MAGAs are with him on the Ukraine issue. There's a load of mad, lunatic stuff on social media. Most of it's completely untrue, factually wrong and historically wrong. But actually, the majority of Americans are quite horrified by Donald Trump's policy on Ukraine. And where are you in terms terms of Syria, we mentioned a little bit earlier these ISIS jihadis, basically being able to more than 400 return. But as Mesa Clifford points out, there are 70,000 in total, not all British. America has actually had a lot more return, but they're in jail in America. The issue is that we just don't seem to have the wherewithal to charge these people, and they're out on the streets. That cannot be allowed to happen.
No, you see the catastrophic failure with this. Also, there's been many cases in which Britain has basically allowed British citizens, jihadis, to be tried and locked up in America because they know that the processes there are much more robust. You've obviously got the Shamima Begum case that we've been talking about, which would never probably have got to the point that it did if we could say confidently that as soon as she arrives back on British soil, we would have the legislation in place to deal with her in a proper and robust fashion. And we've just been... The whole debate became about whether or not Shamima Begum should come back or not, understandably, because there's a lot of issues at play. But at the same time, the thing that we should have been looking at in the background was like, what about all these hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of people that we might have to worry about here? What are we going to do with them when there aren't going to be neat loopholes that we can exploit to try and keep them at bay?
They genuinely left this country, most of them born and bred in this country, they left this country to go and fight for a cause which they knew openly was about, beheading people, taking sex slaves, the absolute brutality of that, it's about the caliphate. They don't believe in democracy, they don't believe in Britain, they don't believe in women's rights, they don't believe in, people's religious self-determination or anything like that. I mean, these are terrifying, dangerous people, and they're on our streets among us.
And yet there's been no real effort to work out what to do about them. And that's been so strong. And again, this is one of those things where you've got to lay a lot of blame at the last Tory government. This was a huge debate which engulfed their Home Secretary in particular for years upon years upon years. And yet that fundamental issue about what you're going to do when the lion's share of them do actually come back.
And by the way, just a reminder, they had a majority most of the time where they could have actually pushed through any laws to deal with that. Anyway, human rights, 11:49 is the time. I'm going to take a quick break. Up next, we're going to be talking about that man arrested over a terror probe, over an arson at the Prime Minister's home. We'll talk to Chris Phillips, former head of the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office. This is Talk.
I think the whole conversation has changed. Some of us have got scars on our backs from fighting for this stuff for years and years in which it was not just unfashionable, but completely taboo to be aggressively questioning and challenging the scale of uncontrolled immigration. Those of us that have been at the forefront of this political debate have been called every name under the sun, and that's fine. We're used to it. You stick your neck out, you've got to be ready.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Tom Slater's still with us. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all the topics we're talking about, particularly that conversation with Mesa Clifford about the ISIS jihadis returning to this country. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. And let's talk right now about that developing news story. If we do get any more updates, we'll bring them to you. But the arrest in the early hours this morning of a 21-year-old man by counter-terrorism police probing suspected arson attacks on the Prime Minister's family home in North London. a car belonging to the family in the same street, and also another property, a flat, also believed to be owned by the Starmer family. Very, very worrying for many, many MPs, and indeed the Starmer family, after it does appear that there was this arson attack and fire, a big bang heard by neighbours. And we've seen, of course, lots of pictures of the forensics police and officers pouring over the scene. But what is the latest on that? Let's talk to Chris Phillips. He's former head of the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office. Very good morning to you, Chris.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. I mean, look, this police investigation, early on, I think people thought, oh, it must have been a house fire, the Starmers aren't there. And then we understood there was counter-terrorism police involved in an arson probe, the development of an arrest. What do you make of that?
These houses, you can't protect every house that Starmer owns or has owned or has lived in. Yeah. Clearly, these addresses were known, and the vehicle was an interesting one because it's obviously, I believe, one that's similar to one that Keir Starmer used to drive or did drive. So we have this issue of people knowing where MPs live.
Yeah. Of course, we had all that footage, didn't we, of Keir Starmer and his wife clapping outside during lockdown.
Yeah. And Jeremy Corbyn and everyone else, the press hook up outside people's houses, so they know where they live. So we cannot protect all these places. What's interesting is that this person clearly has got some disagreement or dislike of Keir Starmer, particularly to attack him. But it is a concern that members of the Parliament who should be able to go about their business sometimes feel threatened. And whilst we can do as much, and the police can do as much as they can to give them effective advice, there's no 100% security for any of these people.
And not the way that we do it. We don't have, like the Donald Trump level of security. I mean, again, talking with Tom Slater a bit earlier, MPs having their surgery sessions, on Fridays and Saturdays, meeting with local constituents. Now, many are advised you can't publicise these in advance. It has to be by appointment. People have to be vetted. You have to have somebody, a police officer with you in the room. After, of course, the horrific murder of David Amos and, of course, of Jack Cox some years back in 2016. I mean, it's just absolutely horrific. We're in that situation. In terms of likely motivation, I mean, goodness knows these days where motivation comes from. The obvious one, but everyone would leap to statistically, is, Islamists. Then, of course, we'll say far right. It could be someone on the left, pro-Palestinian. We do not know yet. We don't even know if the man who's been arrested is indeed guilty of these crimes, hasn't been charged with any crime so far. Of course, is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. But there is such an issue with MPs generally and cabinet ministers, anyone prominent, facing these sorts of threats. And you say, look, we can't protect everyone, but we've seen cases, haven't we, with Rishi Sunak, his large constituency home up in Yorkshire when he was Prime Minister, and eco-activists being able to go and jump on the roof and put up banners and things. I think a lot of us do wonder that you don't have security there 24/7, so that when the PM and his family, whoever it is, do turn up, that they know they can be safe. I do worry that when we say we can't protect these people, we're not even doing the basics right.
Yeah, well, serving prime ministers, I totally agree with you, and I was surprised at that incident. But where we have here today or yesterday with this house that isn't even occupied by the Starmers, that's a different matter altogether. But it's interestingly, the last hour of your show has all been about the criminal justice system not being fit for purpose. I mean, it's as simple as that. We can't deal with Shamama Begum. We can't deal with terrorists coming back. We certainly haven't got enough police officers to keep all of our MPs safe. This is something that we failed to invest in. I mean, I laugh, Julia. I see Theresa May walking around with an armed team of police officers, and she is the very person that took away all the police officers from our towns and villages. So it makes me laugh that MPs do expect to be protected, quite rightly, but we've so disrupted policing and criminal justice system that none of us can feel particularly safe.
No, that is the feeling I think a lot of us have. Can I go back to the conversation we just had with Mesa Gifford actually about the risk from these ISIS fighters returning? Look, you were the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office boss, for goodness sake. How concerned are you and your former colleagues that there are people coming to these shores or coming back to our shores who are a clear and present danger to the public?
No, well, they are, and there's no doubt about that. And there's also the unknowns, the people that we don't know about that have come specifically to commit crime or specifically to commit terror. And, you know, we've seen recently with these Iranians that have been arrested, there is no doubt we've got an awful lot of people in our country that are a real concern to us. And again, you know, we talk about this, and I'm, you know, right behind you on this from what you said, Julia. Begum should be here. But because of our criminal justice system, she can't be here, and it's a simple fact that we don't have the resources in the UK to protect our people.
Well, we do. No, we do. We're a very, very rich country. We do have the resources. We choose
we have the
not
resources,
to...
but we haven't deployed them.
Exactly.
And, you know,
those are two different things.
Today,
yeah.
Look at policing today, Julia. There are more police officers leaving than there are joining.
Yep.
We are building up for ourselves a big problem.
Oh, absolutely.
We don't have the security, the policing to deal with the problems.
Every copper I know. I went to, as I mentioned in the show a while back, I went to a friend's 50th who's a copper, and virtually everyone there was a copper, and every single one of them was just counting down the days, the weeks, the months, or the years until retirement, until they get their pension and leave, because they're so miserable in the job. That is not a good state of affairs. Chris Phillips, always so good to talk to you. Thank you for taking the time. Been great to get your expertise. Tom Slater, listening to that. I mean, again, big concerns for anyone's safety, Prime Minister or any MP. It is really, really important, is it not, that we have a situation where people can be democratically elected and not be living in fear for their and their families' lives. Full stop.
No, absolutely. This should be a bipartisan thing. This should be something that we recognise across the board, and we should take very seriously the new kinds of threats which are emerging against MPs, which, you know, whilst we shouldn't catastrophise, we shouldn't say that this is a unique problem to our time, it does become more enabled by social media, the ability to work out where someone lives. You see an image on the television of someone being doorstep, you can cross-reference that with Google Street View. There's all these
well
different
done, tell
things.
everyone how to do it.
No, exactly. So if anyone wants some more tips,
ask an 8-year-old, they'll be able to do it.
It's that sort of thing where there's just all these things are so much clearer now, and it requires us to think afresh about how we make sure that that's the thing. Protecting MPs from this kind of harassment and potentially violence is so important to just protecting the entire democratic process. We solve our differences.
But also, if we want people to be in touch, we want them to know what the price of we say, well, how much is the pint of milk, Prime Minister? Well, if they don't know, if they can't go to their local Tesco Metro because it's too dangerous and they might get threatened. So I mean, it's really important that if we want people to represent us, who live in the real world with us, they need to be allowed to move freely there, and certainly their families, absolutely. Well, the interesting thing is somebody who could work out where the Prime Minister's family home was also someone who would surely know he's not there. Again, of the risk to the people who were renting that property. I'm sure there, of course, the Prime Minister had given it to some asylum seekers. I'm sure he had, rather than that. But anyway, loads more coming up, plenty more to talk about. Do give us a call. Let's know what you think about all the big topics. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Headlines up next. This is Talk.
How much?
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon to you. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense. It's 2 minutes past 12. Thank you very much for joining me, whether you're listening on DAB Plus Radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube, or on your connected device. Always great to have your company, and of course the company of editor of Spiked Online regularly on a Tuesday. That's Tom Slater, still with us. Lots more to talk about in this hour. Just to get you up to date, just in case you have just tuned in, missed the headlines, 21-year-old man has been arrested over a series of arson attacks, including a fire at the Prime Minister Keir Starmer's family home in North London. The man remains in police custody. We'll bring you up to date if there are any developments on that. Plus, hundreds of migrants crossed the Channel in small boats yesterday morning as Keir Starmer stood in Downing Street promising to take back control of Britain's borders. You couldn't make it up, eh? Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is facing criticism from left-wing Labour MPs, well, now suspended MP John McDonnell, and others who liken the PM's speech to Enoch Powell after Starmer warned that mass immigration risks making Britain an island of strangers. Also, Lucy Connley, the wife of a former Conservative councillor who was jailed for 31 months last year after a tweet about migrants on the day of the Southport attacks, is going to appeal the sentencing at a hearing on Thursday. We'll talk about that. And Donald Trump, on a trip to the Middle East, he's currently in Saudi Arabia, has said he may well pop to Istanbul if Vladimir Putin turns up for a meeting with Zelensky for Ukrainian peace talks. But he's also claimed that the European Union is nastier than China as he switched the focus of his global trade war. This came just hours after the US agreed a 90-day pause on tit-for-tat tariffs with Beijing, and the US president suggested the EU was not paying its fair share. He really does not like the EU, does he? Anyway, all of that coming up. Tom Slater, just before we get to our next guest, the big focus this week has been on legal migration. Mm-hmm. How much do you think the arrival of almost 500 illegal migrants to the country yesterday undermines the Prime Minister's claim with his his immigration bill, the white paper published yesterday, and the speech he made yesterday about taking control? So he actually used the phrase "taking back control" in his speech. What do you make of that? Is that undermined?
Oh, it's just a perfect metaphor for his failure, for successive governments' failure. You would have thought that if they were planning to do this kind of... If this really was about what Keir Starmer really believed in, rather than just a hasty response to some terrible local elections in which Reform did very well, you wouldn't have held it on such a clear, warm spring day when we know there were going to be so many crossings. These supposed PR geniuses who work in Number 10 were caught out once again. That's a mark of just
how bad they are. You at least do it on a day when it's raining. You've got a good chance. Again, I don't suppose they can predict the weather or anything that Donald Trump is doing at that particular time as well. Well, look, let's go to our first guest. I do want to hear from you as well on what he has to say, and indeed everything that's been talked about. 0344 499 1000. You can text on 87222. Get in touch on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs one standard network rate message, in particular asking about what Keir Starmer had to say yesterday, but particularly also Labour MPs, suspended Labour MPs, the likes of John McDonnell, Zora Sultana and others, criticising the Prime Minister, saying he's echoing Enoch Powell after the PM warned that mass immigration risks making Britain an island of strangers. What do you think? Love to know your thoughts. I'd love to know the thoughts also of our next guest, Lord Lilly. Peter Lilly is a former deputy leader of the Conservative Party and joins us now. Very good afternoon to you.
Just afternoon.
Thank you very much. It's only just afternoon, yes. Thank you very much for joining us. Well, look, what do you make, first of all, of the criticisms from the left-wing flank of the Labour Party, John McDonnell, Zora Sultan and others, although now suspended over goodness knows what, a last thing, the proposed Palestinian of some sort, I think. But what do you make of their criticisms of Keir Starmer for being basically echoing Enoch Powell for this phrase that Britain could become an island of strangers?
Well, the state itself, of course, is what people are worried about. They do feel that their country is changing, and that's perfectly legitimate fear. What is extraordinary is the hypocrisy of someone like Starmer, whose whole career has been on trying to pretend that our duty is to treat everybody in the rest of the world as at least equal, if not superior, in their rights to come here and live here. And then suddenly, because of bad election results, he's trying to pretend he's moving the other direction. So on that, in that respect, MacDonald is right that Starmer is a hypocrite and should either admit that he's been wrong all his life or continue with his old beliefs and
that's the thing. On so many different issues, this Prime Minister, we have this from many politicians, as you know, many different parties, but particularly Keir Starmer, he will just suddenly say, no, this is what I think. And you think it's the exact opposite of what he thought apparently the day before. But no one ever seems to ask him, and he certainly never explains why he is changing. But why did he one moment think the economic benefits of migration were worth it, that there was no cultural impact, that everything was fine, and now suddenly he thinks it's a really bad thing and that something needs to be done about it? Why do you suspect he thinks that, or pretends to think that?
That was question, what first attracted you to the multimillionaire so-and-so? You know the answer to that. What first attracted you to this policy? Well, it's seen that the reform did very well in the local elections. That's the sole reason he's pretending to have changed his policy. The substance hasn't changed very much. We're still, even on the most optimistic view of the impact of these changes, going to be allowing hundreds of thousands of people to come here every year, so that within every 2 or 3 years we'll have imported the population of Birmingham without any plans to build a new Birmingham anywhere to accommodate them.
You were deputy of the party back in 98, 99. That was obviously when Tony Blair was in charge after that landslide in 97. It was under the Blair years, 2000 onwards, that we saw this explosion of immigration in this country. Again, exploded even more under Cameron, and then even more under Boris Johnson. Given that pretty much every single election from then onwards, well, not from then onwards, from, basically the late 2000s onwards, every election, one of the key issues at the election time was the high level of immigration, and voters by a large majority again and again saying we would like net immigration levels to go down, promises from Tory leader after Tory leader that they would do that. Why didn't Tory leaders bring immigration down? What was the motivation to not do that when that was what the voters told them to do?
They were taken in by the arguments put forward by Blair and the CBI. It was Blair at the CBI conference in 2004, I think, who put forward the case that we had to have mass migration to promote growth and to fill shortages. And I wrote a pamphlet at the time in 2005 called Too Much of a Good Thing, debunking all these arguments and saying it wasn't true. Unfortunately, no one took any notice, and since then I've not been allowed on the BBC on these matters, which is another reason.
Are you serious? You've not been invited on the BBC at all since?
Not on these matters, of course not. No, nor on immigration, nor on net zero. Other matters they'll let me talk about, but none of those three for the last 20 years. So they've been part, your esteemed station didn't exist in those days, so there was tended to be a monopoly of news.
Yeah.
So these arguments were believed. We've now had 20 years during which we've had the highest level of migration in our history, indeed equal to all previous migration put together, and the lowest rate of growth. So we know that theory was wrong. We've also started off, when Blair made this speech, he said there are 600,000 vacancies in the country. We need migrants to fill them. We've allowed several million workers to come here, and we now have 800,000 vacancies.
Yeah.
That shouldn't be any surprise to anybody, because each worker, say he produces £30,000 worth of value to his employer, who pays him £30,000, he then spends £30,000. So he creates as much demand for extra work and goods and services as he satisfies. So it was always going to be thus. But people were so taken in by this because it was backed by the CBI, who of course just simply wanted cheap, skilled and unskilled workers from abroad, and we're glad to have a Prime Minister who argued that it was a good thing.
Well, this is the thing. So even when we have, Conservative Prime Ministers elected not to do this, and even, again, this Labour Prime Minister had to say they would bring immigration down, just because there's no way they would have passed muster last July with voters if they didn't, certainly in those red wall seats that they won back from Boris Johnson's big win in 2019. But they still sort of pay lip service to it. But do you think that actually most of the politicians involved still fundamentally think that immigration is a good thing, and well, we've got a few problems here and there, but basically they're just people who think Enoch Powell was right, rivers of blood, we're not really listening to them because actually business needs these people, care homes need these people, government needs these people, the NHS need these people, and we won't function without it, so we'll pay lip service and say yes, we'll get it down, wink wink wink, like Boris Johnson did, and then we'll just carry on as we were and just hope no one notices. I mean, is that the plan?
still think an awful lot of people in certainly in the Labour Party, the majority of people in the Labour Party still have convinced themselves of these factually disproven theories that mass immigration is good for growth and fills vacancies. There are some people in my own party who still believe that, though it's taken 20 years, but the Conservative Party is changing, and I know Kemi certainly doesn't believe this nonsense and is weaning her party off this addiction to cheap imported skilled and unskilled labour.
And the reality is, of course, that is a benefit to big business. And again, if they don't see a growth in wages, because there's lots of supply of cheaper labour, you don't see that growth in wages. They can keep their prices down. But actually, we end up subsidising that with all the pressure on public services, pressure on housing, and of course, housing benefits, social housing, tax credits, you name it. We end up subsidising those low wages. It works out well for business, but not so well for the taxpayer.
It doesn't even work out well for businesses in the long run. An individual business may benefit from recruiting from abroad, but when everybody's doing it, as you say, it results in all those extra costs which business has to bear, and higher taxes and less value of money of those that they do employ and pay. So it's not good for the economy, and we've seen this dreadfully slow rate of growth for the last 20 odd years, indeed ever since mass migration.
Yeah, it's almost like there might be a link. Exactly, the exact opposite of everyone saying productivity and growth have completely disappeared, and at the same time as we had mass migration.
And we need to get that over, Julia. The two things that promote growth are more investment per head of the workers already here, and more skills of the workers already here.
Yeah.
And if you have access to cheap labour, people invest less, and there's less incentive to train or to acquire skills. Yeah. We've seen expenditure on that go down, time spent training people go down, and less investment per head. So it's a direct result of mass migration that we have slower growth.
Yeah, ta-da, almost, you say. There we go. What do you make of the criticism? Keir Starmer's getting this criticism from, let's use these terms loosely, because I know a lot of ways they're not meaningful anymore, the left and the right. So he's getting criticism from the right, people saying, look, Tories and Reform, we don't believe a word you say. Our audience, to a man and a woman, is saying, don't believe that Keir Starmer means a single word of it. Don't believe he'll deliver it. Even if he did deliver, what the Home Office has predicted would be a £100,000 people fall in the net migration figures a year until 29. Even that doesn't touch the size of what people want. They want it back in the tens of thousands, as it was basically when you were back on the front bench. That's what it was then. But also criticism
It was lower than that.
Well, it was 20 to 30,000. Yeah. Can I just get to that?
No. For the whole Thatcher period, 12 years she was in power, net migration was net zero. Absolutely zero.
That's very interesting.
Growth encouraged. Growth improved during that period.
That's a very interesting point. That's a key fact to take away, isn't it? But what do you make also criticism on the left? We've talked about likes of John McDonnell, the former Shadow Chancellor, for goodness sake, on the left, and others accusing the Prime Minister of echoing Enoch Powell by using this phrase, an island of strangers. We've also had criticism, sort of thinly veiled, as he always does, Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, saying he would not have used the phrase island of strangers. He said, the sort of language I use is different to the language used by others. That's not the sort of words I would use. He didn't directly criticise the PM, but we know that's what he thinks. What do you make of those criticisms of what Keir Starmer had to say and the words he chose to use?
Right in pointing out that he is a hypocrite. He spent his whole life claiming that we are a racist country and most immigration law has smells of racism. And then he suddenly starts using phrases like that, which, if coming from someone else would pass without much notice because it's a lesser truth. But coming from him just exposes his own hypocrisy.
Yeah, I mean, that's his record. In terms of where this is all going to play out, I don't think anyone realistically believes we are going to see a serious cut in net migration. We will see numbers. I think Thursday next week we're going to get those numbers, the latest figures for 2024. No doubt they will be revised upwards of where they were, but we are going to in future see a cut because we've seen those changes brought in by Rishi Sunak, the number of visas that were actually going to be allowed to be handed out. Do you think that we're actually going to see anything resembling the sort of cut that voters want? And if we don't see that, what happens?
we won't see that, nor will we see any significant reduction, probably a big continuing increase in illegal immigration, which is only a small part of the big minority of the total, but it's very high profile and people particularly resent it. We won't see either of those things, public demands being met, and therefore the public will become increasingly cynical, and/or the Labour Party will have to take more serious measures on both fronts. I hope the latter. I want to see them do the right thing rather than do the wrong thing and give me sort of political ammunition. I'd rather not have the political ammunition.
That's a very fair point. Lord Peter Lilly, former Deputy Leader of the Conservative Party, thank you very much, Steve, for joining us. Very interesting to talk to you. Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online, still with us. It's interesting, that point, actually. I was looking back at those figures with 20 to 30 net migration through most of those decades, but actually ahead of the big boom under Blair of net migration just massively exploding, and has done so ever since. But actually under Margaret Thatcher, that it was net zero.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it just shows that this is a relatively sort of recent phenomenon, and so therefore people trying to make longer-term historical
and
comparisons.
People often do that, don't they? Say we're a nation that's all a nation of immigrants. No, we're not.
If you want to argue for migration or even mass migration, do so. You don't have to kind of pretend that 'twas ever thus. That's something that I really don't understand.
No, in Shakespeare's time, everyone was black and Asian. I mean, they literally make that argument at the BBC.
I do think, unfortunately, there's not a lot of substance often to this debate. It's often kind of had on the level of platitudes and wanting to look like a good person. I think that's one of the primary obstacles to this Labour government being able to look credible and serious on this, is that whilst they know that they're trying to pitch themselves to working class voters across the country who care about this issue quite deeply, they are surrounded by people in their own party, in the media, the people who kind of set the political weather, regrettably, who haven't really thought about this very deeply, who still think in a kind of very vague virtue signalling way about it, and are the ones who can make a lot of noise. And I think it's so telling that what the conversation that we're having today is not what has Keir Starmer pledged and will it meet the problem. It's what language did he use and who is it upset.
To be fair, we did talk about it yesterday as well, and whether or not
you or I, not this station, but in general,
a lot of that,
that's I think quite interesting.
But the conversation in BBC and Sky is always about did someone use some hurty words?
Yeah,
that is always the debate. I think even going further than that, not only do they not really believe it or accept it themselves, when they accept that, okay, the British public, including Labour voters, don't like mass immigration, they don't accept the reasons why.
Yeah.
It's because, same for Brexit, won't accept it, but everybody voted for it as racist. I've never understood why you're racist if you want to limit the number of white people coming from Europe. I never got that argument. It always seemed to me to be spurious, but there we are. But I still think they fundamentally believe that anyone who says, I don't think it's a good idea to bring in a city the size of Birmingham into this country of new people from largely 86% or so, I think the last couple of years, coming from overseas, not from far overseas, not from the EU, very different cultures, language, religious backgrounds, and I don't think it's a good idea to bring that many people in every single year. That, economically, culturally, pressure on public services, but everything. They fundamentally think that people who think that are just racist, xenophobic bigots.
Yeah,
that's what they actually believe.
It's the kind of Cathy Newman reflex, isn't it? It's like, I'm concerned about immigration, so what you're saying is you're racist. No, I'm just concerned about housing, so what you're saying is you don't like immigrants. It just goes on and on and on, all the way down. And it's often from people who, to be honest, to the extent that they interact in this country, their life is so cosseted,
rarefied,
and insulated from any of the negative impacts of any of the policies the government is pursuing, that you wonder how they can have the temerity to lecture people about this issue or anything else.
I still remember one of the reasons why I came to this topic very, very early, when I was obviously far-right, racist, bigots, all the words that are thrown in, was because I could see across the river to my patch in Bethnal Green. I worked on the East London Advertiser the first year after out of journalism college. Yes, I know, my so-called journalism training. And I love that. So I love that. My favourite is on Twitter, so-called journalist. It just makes me laugh. But I don't know what a so-called journalist is, but there we are. Government doesn't know what a so-called solicitor is, or even a so-called economist. But anyway, I digress. But going to local schools, and again, there was already the battles going on, the race and religious issues, and the one of the local schools, and there was the whole thing about white flight. But we're talking about local schools, which 5 years earlier had been, people, locals had lived in the area for years and years, and within 5 years had become 90% Bangladeshi and Bengali speaking. So the mums at the school gate didn't speak English. and parents go, but my kid is literally like the only white kid in my class. Now you can say, oh well, that makes you racist. No, they've got no one to talk to. They're not invited back to people's homes. They're not. There's just no social life. There's no interaction. This isn't Britain anymore. Now people can say well, you must be racist and awful or Islamophobic or whatever. But those are legitimate concerns. And I remember realising then, oh, this is something that didn't impact me in my middle class life, but it was absolutely impacting people living in the East End and elsewhere, places where they had fewer choices and where people were coming en masse and completely failing to integrate at all. Completely separate societies living parallel lives. And that was back in the mid-90s, and I'm like, oh, there is something going wrong here. That was before it massively exploded. And again, I just think so many people in my job, as journalists, totally and utterly unaware of the reality of this on people's daily lives. But there we are. That's just me. We're going to get to your calls. Love to hear your thoughts on all of the things we're talking about. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Plenty more top guests coming up, including Tom. We'll get to your calls up next. This is Talk.
The point I was making is, if you come illegally and don't get deported, people will keep coming. Yeah. And the bar to deportation, the thing that stopped the Conservatives' Rwanda plan from working, was, of course, if you remember, the intervention at 10 o'clock at night of a judge in Strasbourg in the European Court of Human Rights, the incorporation of that law into the 1998 Human Rights Act. And British judges, I mean, we've even seen someone not deported because his kid liked chicken nuggets.
I know.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon to you. At 12:25 is the time. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Coming up, we are going to be talking more about free speech. I know we should try and promote that more often. Happens on this station, not necessarily everywhere else. And the latest goings on from Donald Trump. We're going to talk to Democratic strategist Antoine Seawright. None of our interviews have ended well so far with Antoine. He gets jolly cross with me. I'm hoping this one will be more positive, but it might be quite enjoyable. You don't want to miss that. Anyway, it's all coming up right now. Let's get to your calls. 0344 499 1000 and your messages. Texting on 87222 and messaging us on X at talkTV. Don't forget those calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs one standard network rate message. Can't remember if I said that or not this hour. But Leslie is on the line from the Wirral. Hello, Leslie. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, and lovely to speak to you, Julia.
Lovely to speak to you again. What do you want to say?
I'm sort of worried about the fact that there's very little being said about an impending crisis that's about to hit our shores. Mm-hmm. Just to give an example, my stepdaughter has been issued in the last couple of weeks with a Section 21 no-fault eviction notice.
Yeah.
It's, it happened a couple of days after the publicity about the government wanting to contract with private landlords to put in asylum seekers.
With 5-year contracts paying double the local rent rate,
Yeah. And so, rents in the area have gone through the roof, which makes it unaffordable for people. Yep. We've just had somebody from Healthy Homes, which is part of environmental health, to come and look at the property because it's been substandard ever since you moved in. There's damp, there's mould, the double glazing is all clouded over and doesn't work properly, etc., etc. And it's fairly obvious that the person that owns the property thinks, oh, if I get Serco to do it, they'll make it good.
Because they'll have to, because it's an asylum seeker, so they'll have to have it done.
Yes, but I know of at least 3 or 4 people, locally who are in the same situation. And that's without actually doing any,
and that's on the Wirral, that's nearby.
Yeah. And that's without doing any real research.
Yeah.
If you did the research, you'll probably find there's hundreds. And, in Merseyside area, probably thousands.
Yeah.
What's going to happen to these people? The Magenta, which is the local housing association, somebody was telling my stepdaughter a couple of days ago that they've got 10,000 on the waiting list. The lady from Healthy Homes said that the council, the waiting list is years, and, it's swallowing up so much money. Putting people in temporary accommodations coming out of the education budget, the social services budget. And what's we going to do with these people? Are we going to put them in tents in Burton Heath Park?
Yeah, well, we're not allowed to put asylum seekers in tents, as has been suggested by some, but we're not. But it turns out that's absolutely fine for homegrown Brits. Leslie, thank you very much indeed. Very interesting call. Tom Slater, what do you make of what she had to say?
It's just a reminder, isn't it, about all the downstream problems from failing to get on top of the issue of legal migration, of asylum, and it's
building enough houses. When you import millions of people, maybe you might need more homes.
It's designed,
that's just the legal ones.
It's designed to cause unrest and tension. It's something that if you want to be a sort of serious government, and also one thing that's been so striking, it's been really shown up by the Serco story in particular, and the various areas in which they were planning to fund this new sections of accommodation, give the landlords all these inducements to do it and so on.
Well, they're paying like service charge, they're paying the utilities.
Yeah, we'll give you a nice
everything.
long contract. You'll be able to count this money for years to come. All that stuff is that very similar to the hotels. For the obvious reason that the accommodation is cheaper in those areas, it's falling in some of the poorest areas of Britain as well. So it's if you don't want people to resent this issue of mass illegal migration, of the asylum system and so on, maybe don't do that. Maybe don't take places which already have a strain on housing stock, resources, what have you, and say we're now going to put this extra pressure.
But again, where do they go? The point is we're not getting rid of them, and there are more and more and more coming. And those 500 who arrived yesterday during while Keir Starmer was speaking, a couple of hundred arrived. They're never going to be deported. They may or may not get asylum. Most of them won't get asylum. What they'll be doing, we called it, most people do get asylum. It's absolute rubbish. They get indefinite leave to remain because they just get them off the books. And then everyone goes, well, they're no longer in the hotels, or they're no longer in private accommodation paid for out the asylum system. Tick, tick, tick. But of course, they're now earning 50 grand a year to become net contributors to society with no skills whatsoever, having arrived from Afghanistan or Somalia or Vietnam or wherever they come from. I mean, Vietnam, surprisingly high on the list of the number of people coming here. I mean, it is just extraordinary that they're here. They're never leaving. We're stuck with them. We're going to be paying for them one way or another forever.
And even some of the discussion, around reform about, it shouldn't be hotels, it shouldn't be accommodation, maybe it should be barges or tents. You kind of keep going down the kind of list.
Yeah.
All of this is a function of failing to deal with the problem at source. And then you end up having sometimes quite an unpleasant argument about let's make it as unpleasant as possible for them. No, let's sort out the issue at source. Let's stop people being able to exploit these porous borders, and let's make sure that the incentives are such that people aren't risking their lives to make this crossing in the first
But
place.
this is the issue. I think it's the same for legal migration and illegal migration. Even if we were able to stop the boats and smash the gangs, not going to happen. You have to get rid of the pull factors rather than anything else. Even if we were able to get net migration in this country down to tens of thousands, again, not going to happen unless reform. I think even reform would probably struggle to do that. You are still left with the situation of what we've already got here. A whole load of people, 110,000, I think, back last December, languishing in hotels, in accommodation paid for by the state, who are claiming asylum and almost certainly have no right to be here, are economic migrants. You've also got millions of people who've come to this country who've overstayed their visas, have no right to be here. Millions of people who are here, who've come here legally. They may have worked hard, but they're not net contributors to this country. And yes, they're having kids, and we need to have more kids. That's a good thing demographically, but only if their kids are going to be net contributors. And you're in this spiral now. We are now stuck with this problem. And unless someone says, we are going to have to remove a number of people who have come here, who have no right to be here anymore, or say, no, you don't have indefinite leave to remain because you're not a net contributor. Thank you for your, thank you for your service. But at the end of the day, unless we start being ruthless, and pretty much everyone, the great and the good, in charge of everything in this country, is pretty much of the view that we should have open borders and everyone's got a right to live anywhere they want. So we're not going to deal with it. This problem doesn't go away. Even if you literally elected, Nigel Farage tomorrow and he instigated his net zero policy of immigration, we don't solve any of the problems we've already got. But
also there needs to be a more realistic conversation as well about, we can all agree, and even Keir Starmer seems to agree, that we have vast sections of not just the private sector but even kind of sections of the public sector which are reliant on, say, cheap imported labour. Again, that's something which you need to wean these various sectors off of. You can't do that overnight.
Yeah,
that's one thing that I think Reform are going to come under a bit more pressure for now, is like
a
clearer policy, more of a roadmap.
If you're a government in waiting, you're going to have to flesh out your detail. Yeah, absolutely, and it's only fair that people do that. Right now, we're going to take a quick break to hear about this amazing competition for Champions League final tickets. You can find out how you could be in with a chance of winning a weekend away in Munich at the end of May to watch the biggest game in European football, of course, the Champions League final. We're also putting £5,000 in your pocket to spend however you want. Take a listen.
Win a once-in-a-lifetime trip to watch the Champions League final live. Go to talksport.com/win for your chance to embark on the ultimate odyssey of football ecstasy. With 2 tickets to the Champions League final live at the iconic Munich Football Arena, Germany, including flights, accommodation, and an uber-massive £5,000 in your hand. How about that? Enter online now at talksport.com/win. Terms and conditions apply. Achtung, baby.
18 plus, UK, excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win all of that, simply text the word football to 83338 by the 16th of May at 11 p.m. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission, or send your name and number by post to Champions League final competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 21st of May. This is a TalkSport limited competition run on TalkSport Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Take a breath there, Mike. He's finally given us all those details. Don't miss out on that incredible giveaway from our colleagues at TalkSport. We'll take a quick break. Up next, we're going to be talking about Lucy Connley, the woman who wrote, serving 31 months behind bars for a tweet she wrote in the wake of the Southport attacks. We're going to be talking to the Academy of Ideas, Mo Lovett, about whether or not she has a chance of winning her appeal on Thursday. This is Talk.
UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good afternoon. Welcome back to the show. 12:37 is the time. Tom Slater's still with me. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. We're joined right now by Mo Lovett, who's Programme Coordinator at the Academy of Ideas, and joins us to talk about, well, various free speech stories. Very good afternoon to you, Mo.
Hi there, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. Let's talk first of all about Lucy Connley, who constantly is referred to in the media as a Tory councillor's wife or a former Tory councillor's wife. She's got a name herself. Her name is Lucy Connley. She is serving 31 months behind bars after pleading guilty to a charge of inciting racial hatred for a post she wrote last July 29th. That was the day of the horrific Southport attack by ex-Rudder in which he killed 3 little girls, stabbed many others, life-changing injuries for them. And she wrote in the Post, I can't read out all the words because it's that horrific. Mass deportation now, set fire to all the effing hotels, full of the B word, for all I care. If that makes me racist, so be it. Now, that post was viewed more than 300,000 times before she deleted it under 4 hours later. She found herself arrested, wasn't allowed bail, pleaded guilty, has not been given any of the normal privileges that a non-violent first-time offender, a mother and carer as she is, would normally be given by prison governors. There have been various complaints about that. Alison Pearson, the Telegraph, has written up the difficulties her family and she are going through behind bars. She's got an appeal that's going to be heard on Thursday. Should she be let out? Should her case be thrown out, do you think?
Yes, and also I think if I was a betting woman, I think she probably will win that appeal. The question is whether it should have happened in the first place and the disproportionate nature of the sentence. I think that's what that's what concerns most people, especially free speech advocates like myself. And the reason I think she'll probably be successful is she's got a lot of high-profile figures backing her. Liz Truss has come out in support. She's got the backing, we should say, of the Free Speech Union, who really, they know their stuff and they will be backing her. And also there's been an awful lot of press and public outrage at the conduct of the police. This whole thing about policing what people say in a tweet, just an expression, isn't it? So I think for all those reasons, the police force will have to, take stock of their behaviour. Hopefully they will. But I think she'd probably win that appeal. But
I think you're a bit more hopeful than me. I was thinking actually there's an element where actually her the public profile could almost do damage. And I have to say I'm very much in debt to my good friend Alison Pearson for giving us more details on that case, because actually a lot of the stuff that came out about that case, I was very damning of her when I first heard about it, because it was a horrible, nasty tweet. It wasn't my reaction to even the rumours that we saw online before we knew it was Axel Rudder-Cabana who was responsible. Well, certainly was arrested for and then later convicted of those charges involving the Southport attack. But we were told, there were other racist tweets she'd written, and it was all just kind of drummed up. Whereas in fact, when you actually see the tweets that she wrote, they weren't racist at all. That she had basically people sort of character references from many of the families whose children she was childminder for, who were, many of them were immigrants themselves, people of colour, who were saying there's no experience whatsoever ever being racist, quite the opposite, and they gave good character references. She was a carer for her husband who was unwell, for her young child. There were so many reasons why in any other case, even if she'd committed a theft or a violent crime, that she would not have gone behind bars for a first offence. But somehow this tweet that was up for 3.5 hours was beyond the pale and deserved to be punished, and the book was thrown at her. I think the big issue is that she, like many other people in that scenario, pleaded guilty because they were told, you're not going to get bail, your case isn't going to come to court for 6 months or what, you're better off pleading guilty, you'll get a softer sentence and you'll be out. And of course, pretty much the opposite happened, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the reason I'm slightly more, it depends on the judge, doesn't it? And we can talk about this kind of institutional capture that we've had of our police force and our court system and all the rest of it. Because that, you're right to point out that, there's possibility with the wrong judge, she won't win her appeal. But, you can't prosecute people on the grounds of the fact that their case has caused media and public interest. Yeah. That's just not. It's not part of our judicial system. So hopefully we'll get a sensible judge. But I mean, you talked about some of those mitigating factors, Julia. The other thing is, her tweet, I completely agree with you, completely condemn what she said. You know, it's one thing to have an opposition to immigration policy, but to be hateful of immigrants, and it was, that particular tweet was anyway. But, you know, she had also lost a daughter.
Very good point,
so, you know, if
so when little girls were being stabbed to death, she had a much more, I mean, lots of us had a visceral reaction to that, but even more so having lost her own child.
Exactly. So, you know, I think, I mean, I would question even the incitement. I know riots followed what she said, but, you know, it's not causation necessarily. But, you know, whether you can be charged for incitement is, I think, quite dodgy ground, because you or I wouldn't go out and do something just because somebody tweeted something. Why do we assume that other people will as well?
And isn't that the interesting thing? But I think for a lot of people what is most galling is that it does seem that what someone writes down on social media now is often punished more severely, and police turn up much more quickly than what most of us would consider to be actual crimes, whether they are violence, whether they are theft, people's houses, cars, phones, mobiles stolen or burgled. I mean, and the police far too busy. Look, we had the very high-profile case, didn't we, of Alison Pearson, when police turned up on her door accusing her. She thought of a non-crime hate incident. It turns out it wasn't. It was actually an actual hate crime. Of course, she's still waiting for an apology, which I'm pretty sure she's going to get from Essex Police. We've also got the Kent Police, by all accounts, reviewing an investigation into a retired special constable. This is Julian Fawkes, 71-year-old. He was handcuffed at his home by 6 officers from Kent Police back in November 2023. He was interrogated. He was handcuffed in his own home. As officers searched his home, when we saw the footage on their body cams, so it's finally been released, Telegraph publicised this story, absolutely astounding. There was no crime. He was accused over a social media post regarding the threat of anti-Semitism. He was basically defending Jews and criticising someone and a policy of these for being anti-Semitic. There was absolutely nothing wrong in his social media post whatsoever, and anyone with half a brain reading it would know that. But 6 officers turned up, but they then went through his possessions and his books. They were particularly concerned, apparently, by there being, you know, copies of the Spectator magazine, but also books by Douglas Murray, our good friend here, describing them as very Brexity things. What did you make of that when you heard of that at the Academy of Ideas?
I mean, sort of outraged, and also it's hilarious, you know, very Brexity things. What on earth does that mean, you know? And also it was a legitimate vote that we had to leave the European Union. So, but, you know, the police should not be judging whether somebody's a good person or a bad sort just based on their reading material. It's not their business. You know, they're there to find out if a crime's being committed. And as you say, Julian Fawkes didn't commit a crime. In fact, he was standing up to some of the anti-Semitism. And again, a bit like with the Lucy Connley, he was outraged by that storming of the airport in Russia with people looking for Jews to persecute.
And basically saying it could happen here,
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, despite all the Holocaust education we've had in this country, the fact that they couldn't notice that Martin Nimer quote about first they came for the Jews sort of thing just goes to show you. But, you know, in contrast to the Connolly case, poor old Julian Fawkes, he'd had 26 views on that tweet, 26 views, and there'd been no public outcry. So what on earth are our police doing? Are they just sitting in their offices scouring social media for something that might be deemed offensive?
Someone made a complaint, it would appear. But again, we have that with the non-crime agents, just because someone thinks that, not even themselves, but someone else might take offence, please get involved. But again, there's always a judgment, isn't there? Someone makes a decision to send those 6 coppers. Why 6? Why not 1? Same with, you know, a couple turning up on Alison Pearson's door and other incidents we've seen. It is just extraordinary that these are the things they choose to investigate. And this is all about, isn't it? It is about policing thought. And the argument has always been, we understand from the College of Policing, that actually if you tackle this, there's a whole theory about this, isn't it? If you tackle these sort of supposedly low-level sort of comments on social media, you can prevent violent crime and racism and later on. No evidence for this whatsoever, of course.
No, I mean, the theory even goes on to say it's, you know, it's a slippery slope towards genocide. You know, some of the theories, I mean, it's utterly ridiculous. But who are the College of Policing? I mean, they're not a democratic, accountable organisation. They're the ones training our police officers. So, I think it's about time we really looked at these institutions.
Oh,
the
no,
way they've been
I don't want to look at them. I just want them gone. I just want them gone. Mo Laver, so good to talk to you from the Academy of Ideas. Thank you very much. Another organisation, brilliant organisation, standing up for free speech. Some Slater, you at Spiked Online have been absolutely brilliant on this issue, I have to say. It is terrifying because, again, we talked about this yesterday. There is an element where, again, okay, well, yeah, but you didn't end up the criminal record. He got a caution, but they're going to get rid of that. That's fine. Oh, well, he didn't go to prison. It's and we had the consequence. There are consequences to freedom of speech, and you have to live with them, like Lucy Connley, etc. But actually, and again, it's always the process is the punishment. People go through this. It's incredibly upsetting and scary for people.
No, the way in which the police are just brushing this off is outrageous. The incredible stress and strain and shame and all the things that happen when you get a knock at the door. When
police turning up at your door. Can you imagine all your neighbours seeing that?
I know, and the 6 police officers showing up at Julian Fawkes' door, walking out of his house with evidence bags. You would have thought he was involved in organised crime. One of the heartbreaking things in the story was he told the Telegraph that he was terrified they'd think he was some kind of sex offender or something like this, pulling hard drives out of his computers.
No, if he was a sex offender, they wouldn't turn up and bother.
No, exactly. He was slapping the wrist and then, don't do it again. But it's one of those things where also, being handcuffed, being arrested, sitting in a cell for 8 hours, not knowing what is going to take place. This is an incredibly stressful thing to happen to you. We've had cases recently of Maxie Allen and Rosalind Levine in Borehamwood who got arrested because they were complaining about their child's school too vigorously. Arrested in
by
front
email. Not allowed to write any more emails, but they weren't allowed to communicate any other way.
Arrested in front of their disabled daughter. Like, this is horrendous behaviour. And what is so chilling about those 2 cases in particular is neither of them have broken the law. They went through all of this process. There wasn't a law that had been broken, and yet all of this horrendous treatment happened.
And again, by the way, it all happened under the Tories. Did nothing about it. They talked a good game, never did anything about it.
It's the story of our times.
Absolutely. Almost tying in with the immigration thing. But anyway, 12:48 is the time. I'm going to take a quick break. Up next, going to talk to Democrat strategist Antoine Seawright about all things Trump as he's arrived in the Middle East, the start of a tour of the Middle East for the next few days. We'll talk to him about that, the Trump plane, Ukraine, you name it. This is Talk.
The point I was making is, if you come illegally and don't get deported, people will keep coming.
Yeah.
And the bar to deportation, the thing that stopped the Conservatives' Rwanda plan from working, was, of course, if you remember, the intervention at 10 o'clock at night of a judge in Strasbourg in the European Court of Human Rights, the incorporation of that law into the 1998 Human Rights Act. And British judges, I mean, we've even seen someone not deported because his kid liked chicken nuggets.
I know.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense, for me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Let's get straight to our next guest, Democrat strategist Antoine Seawright, who joins us to talk all things Trump. Very, very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you. It's good to be with you.
Lovely to see you. It's been a long time no see, but I mean, you were quite cross with me last time, I'm sure. I wonder if we might have some more areas of agreement this time around. Donald Trump has arrived in the Middle East on a tour starting with Saudi Arabia, and it's emerged fascinating that he's decided to accept a luxury jet as the new Air Force One, costing $400 million from the Qatari government. Should he be accepting that gift or not?
Absolutely not. You and I both know, and the world knows, if this was any Democratic official accepting this kind of gift, the world would be in outrage and Republicans would be losing their mind, likely calling for impeachment. The appearance of pay for play is here. There's nothing that says that this is a good thing for the long-term benefit or bill of health of America. This is all about Donald Trump, and I don't think it's a good idea. And quite frankly, I think Republicans in the United States Congress should be speaking out loudly about this.
Well, by all accounts, some actually are. Usually some Trump diehards are even there criticising him. It's actually in the US Constitution. There's a provision known as the Emoluments Clause, which restricts what gifts US presidents can accept from foreign governments, basically, so you can't become beholden to foreign governments. I would have thought there's also a really basic issue over security for Air Force One, even if it's refitted by, people in America. This jet apparently sitting there, this Boeing jet in America right now. The Qatari government is a government that I know everyone pretends they're our allies, but they are also a government which basically has offered safe haven to pretty much every terrorist group known to mankind.
Well, when you cuddle and play footsie with evil, evil tends to prevail in the end. And I think that's what Trump has done throughout his career. I think all of this is another example of extreme government overreach. I think Donald Trump and his administration are really testing the system to see what they can and cannot get away with, because he does not have to face the consequences of public opinion in the form of a re-election. And that's where the ballot box matters, because all of this should be tied up around he and the corruption with this administration.
Yeah, but that's the same issue with any president in his second term. Hey, look, at least he's acknowledged he's not going to run for a third, which again is also banned by the Constitution. Now, you're wearing a T-shirt, for those who are not watching on YouTube on a connected device but listening instead. You're wearing a T-shirt that says don't look at me, I didn't vote for him. You're certainly not a Trump fan. I was of the view that the offering last November, if I were an American having two elections, I wouldn't have voted for Trump. I would have voted for him as the least of two bad options. I quite like rather some of the things he's done on immigration, on DOJ and things like that. However, when it comes to international affairs, I've got some big issues with him, and particularly in relation to what he's been doing with Ukraine. He has talked about basically Zelensky, the Ukrainian leader, making concessions to Vladimir Putin. His Steve Witkoff, his envoy, basically saying, give up Crimea, give up the Donbass, and we'll have peace, but we won't give a security guarantee to prevent him taking any more. There's a possibility of this peace talks on Thursday in Istanbul. No ceasefire in place, but Zelensky has gone, fine, I'll turn up. Putin, I'll sit and wait for you. A, do you think Putin's going to turn up? And B, if he does, do you think Donald Trump, as he suggested, could turn up as well? And would there be any sort of peace deal coming out of that?
Well, let me start back with some of your open commentary. Okay. One, I think Donald Trump has been piss poor on every single issue.
Okay, language, I'm afraid that, apologies everybody for that language.
Everything that he promised to the American people that he was going to deliver on, he has not. In every single major issue in this country.
Immigration.
That people have given him high marks for, even for immigration. Even as relates to immigration, he's upside down when it comes to public opinion in America.
He said he would cut immigration at the Mexican border, and he has. That's just simply a fact.
Upside down in the court of public opinion amongst the American people on every single issue, including immigration. When it comes to international affairs, I think the president has been an embarrassment. I think his ongoing cuddling and playing footsie with Putin as Putin's power grab exercise continues to be in play. I think it's an embarrassment. I think it's dangerous, and it sets a very dangerous tone for those who come after Donald Trump. Ukraine is an ally. I think we have to do everything we can to stand with them and stand for them.
Do you think that Donald Trump may change his tune on that? Because there's an element where he was talking earlier, and we had that horrific scene in the Oval Office where he was and J.D. Vance were berating Zelensky. Donald Trump was kind of defending Vladimir Putin, this poor man, you know, who needs his support. But do you think that as the feeling grows, and I know a lot of American people are very critical of Donald Trump's stance on this, that actually he's being played by Vladimir Putin and he's looking like a fool and he's humiliating America as a world power by basically looking like he's being fooled by Putin, that he may change his tune and offer more help to Ukraine and help Ukraine stand fast?
I think this is about pride with Donald Trump. I do not think he's going to change his tune with Vladimir Putin. I think we saw that when Trump was president the first time. We saw evidence, bipartisan evidence, that Russia played a role in hacking to our elections. Donald Trump did not side with the American people. He sided with Vladimir Putin. And then we've seen examples since he's been in office where he's essentially taken the side of Russia and Vladimir Putin. So I don't think he's going to change his tune. I think he's going to continue to play both sides of the fence.
I believe that allegation has actually been completely debunked. Just finally, we've got about 30 seconds. I'll keep it very brief. Donald Trump has claimed that the EU is nastier than China. He switched his focus in his global trade war. Hours after agreeing that 90-day pause and tit-for-tat tariff with China, he has suggested that the EU is not paying their fair share. Why does he think that the EU is nastier than China?
Donald Trump usually says outlandish things to distract the American people and the world from certain other things. Certainly, we cannot take anything he says in a very serious form. I think this is all about him and trying to use the microphone he has to draw attention to himself. I think there's precedent that's been in place around the world and as the United States and where it positioned itself. And I think the EU is a prime example of that.
OK, absolutely fascinating. Well, as Antoine Seawright says, Democratic strategy on his T-shirt, don't look at me, I didn't vote for him. Great to have you on board. Sorry, we had such a short time. Tom Slater, your very quick reaction to any of that?
Just thinking about the EU-China comparison, I'm just struck by the fact that those two blocs are more like each other than they like to let on. Very protectionist, anti-democratic by design.
Not accountable.
No. So
well, all fair points. All fair points. Loving your work there.
Squeeze that in.
I imagine Tom Slater, like me, has quite a lot of very Brexity things in his home.
I'm terrified.
Watch out for the police. Watch out for the police. Only a matter of time. Right now, joined by Ian Collins, who's arrived in the studio.
I think Trump might be right. Have you ever been to Luxembourg? Good Lord.
I don't think I have been to Luxembourg.
No one's been to. You never meet anybody.